Okay, the appointed hour has arrived. Hey, it's a rowdy crowd out here. Good morning and welcome to the January 2014 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please run us through the agenda today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda includes 2 items for your consideration and 2 presentations. First, you will consider a report and order, notice of proposed rulemaking, and notice of inquiry that invites diverse technology transitions experiments to examine how to best accelerate technology transitions by preserving and enhancing the values consumers have come to expect from communication networks. Second, you will consider a policy statement and further notice of proposed rulemaking that sets forth the agency's policy goals regarding the critical public safety functions, text to 911, and other next-generation 911 applications, and seeks comments on proposals for widespread implementation and achievement of those goals. Third, you will hear an update on the timeline and project plan for the Broadcast Television Incentive. Last on your agenda, you will hear a presentation from the staff working group on process reform at the FCC. This is your agenda for today. The first item will be presented by the Office of General Counsel. John Sallet, the Commission's acting General Counsel, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Sallet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I am, as been noted, John Sallet, and I'm joined at the table today by Julie Veach, Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, David Simpson, Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Carol Maddie, Deputy Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Jonathan Chambers, Chief of the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, Henning Schultzreny, our Chief Technology Officer, and also 2 people who have been invaluable in the process of getting ready today, Tim Stelzig of Wireline Competition and Stephanie Weiner of the Office of General Counsel. This morning we present an item to kickstart a process that will allow the Commission and the public to learn about the impact of IP technology transitions that are transforming our nation's communications. Our goal, to speed these transitions by promoting the enduring values Americans have come to expect from their networks. Enduring values that, as Commissioner Rosenworcel has reminded us, include universal access, public safety, competition, and consumer protection. We need to act now. We need to be smart about how we learn to make sure that we have the information and analysis that the Commission will need to address big issues. And, of course, we need to start the work to be ready to address those big policy and legal questions that will not be answered by these experiments. And, of course, nothing that we do today will lead to delay. Not in the marketplace, not at the Commission. So this morning we'll proceed as follows. Julie will describe the new service-based experiments. Then, as an example of how we will protect enduring values, David will talk about public safety as networks transition. We'll move to the next subject when Carol describes an experiment to ensure that transitions reach all Americans, including rural Americans. Jonathan Chambers will describe other targeted research and development efforts, and Henning will talk about our proposal for data collection initiatives. Julie?
Thank you, John. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, this item grants in part a petition from AT&T by soliciting detailed proposals for voluntary experiments that will enable the Commission, as well as other important stakeholders such as state, local, and tribal governments, to test the real-world impacts of replacing existing services with IP-based alternatives in discrete geographic areas or ways. We seek to learn through these experiments how best to protect and enhance the core statutory values of public safety, universal access, competition, and consumer protection. We invite proposals from all types of providers and welcome diversity in design and geographic reach. The item describes how the Commission will evaluate the proposals and identifies conditions, rebuttable presumptions, and other factors that will guide the Commission's evaluation of whether the proposals will preserve the core values while they are ongoing. We will also consider an applicant's plan to keep consumers informed about their experiment and what means it will offer consumers to provide feedback on their experiences. And we will consider the quality of the data an experiment is likely to generate. Data we want to be publicly available to the extent appropriate. After receiving proposals, we will notify and consult with state and tribal authorities as relevant and seek public comment. For proposals received by the initial submission deadline, we anticipate being in a position to provide you with a final decision for your consideration at the May open meeting, with proposals received later to be promptly considered thereafter. I should emphasize that the purpose of the experiments is not to test technology or to decide law or policy. It is to understand the impact of these transitions on consumers and how we can best preserve and even enhance the core values consumers have come to expect from their communications networks: competition, consumer protection, universal access, and of course, public safety. And with that in mind, I turn it over to Admiral Simpson.
Thank you, Julie. As communication technologies evolve, one of the enduring values that the Commission must preserve is public safety. The item you are considering today affirms this enduring value and puts in place a mechanism to ensure public safety critical service elements are proactively evaluated and sustained in the transition to newer communication technologies. We must ensure that the technology transitions protect key public safety functions, including the public's ability to call for help and rely on networks in emergencies. Today's item therefore identifies public safety elements that we expect to be incorporated into technology transition experiments and that will be central to our evaluation of experiment results. For example, fiber-based technology offers many advantages over copper, including greater bandwidth, but copper-based telephone service usually continues to operate during electric outages, while fiber-based telephone service must have backup power to communicate when electricity is interrupted. So one area that we would expect transition experiments to address would be residential, community, and small business continuity of communications during crises. This is one example of the public safety elements we plan to examine closely in upcoming experiments in order to fully understand the emergency services and homeland security impact of the technology transitions, ensure that public safety enduring values are preserved, and to identify additional public safety benefits that new technology can provide. The experiments will then ensure that public safety objectives are in harmony with competition, consumer protection, and universal access. Today's item also adopts an experiment targeted towards promoting universal access, which Carol will describe.
In parallel with the service-based experiments, we're moving forward with targeted experiments that will explore the impact of technology transitions on universal access, one of the enduring values that must be protected and enhanced in the technology transition. Today's order adopts an experiment in which we will solicit proposals to bring advanced services to rural America with support from the Connect America Fund, which will allow the Commission to examine different approaches to ensuring universal access in an all-IP world. These experiments will not increase the size of the Universal Service Fund, nor increase the contribution burden on consumers. Consistent with the statutory principles in Section 254, it is critical that we take steps to ensure that all Americans benefit from technology transitions and that we gain data on the impact of these transitions on consumers in rural areas, including tribal lands, where consumers, small businesses, and anchor institutions, including schools, libraries, and healthcare providers, may not have access to advanced broadband services. Useful information that can be developed through these experiments will help us address 4 interrelated questions. First, the extent of interest among providers to deploy high-speed, scalable IP-based networks to serve high-cost areas where broadband is lacking. Second, the characteristics of areas where service providers would choose to offer wireless services at pricing reasonably comparable to urban wireline offerings. Third, how these transitions will impact anchor institutions and the people they serve. And fourth, how working cooperatively with other governmental agencies, states, localities, tribal governments, and other non-federal government organizations can advance our shared objectives of ensuring access to next-generation services. The order establishes a two-part application process with non-binding expressions of interest due on March 7, 2014. The order welcomes applications from a wide range of entities. The further notice seeks comment on a number of issues related to the experiments, including the budget and the selection criteria. Those issues will be decided by the full Commission in a future order. Formal applications will be solicited after the Commission takes that further action. These experiments will not delay implementation of Phase 2 of Connect America, but rather will yield useful information that will help inform future decisions of the Commission. The Bureau expects to implement the offer of model-based support to price cap carriers before the end of 2014. John.
Thank you. The item before the Commission today is, in many respects, an invitation for service-based trials, an invitation for proposals to deliver high bandwidth and high-cost areas, and an invitation for research and development projects. Carol has articulated 4 questions we seek to have answered in the rural broadband experiment. To me, the rural broadband experiment initially seeks to answer just one question. Can we do better? Can we do better than 4-1 for rural America for the same amount of federal support? We invite proposals. With respect to TRS, we invite research proposals to improve the quality of relay services. This is consistent with our statutory obligation under Section 225 to ensure that relay services evolve with technology. Today, you will vote to fund a $3 million TRS research budget. Now, we don't have a lot of experience in funding research, so we're working with federal partners who do have that experience. And in less than 3 weeks' time, we will host in this room, together with the National Institute on Aging, the first in a series of workshops to gather information on the types of research that are needed to improve the various types of relay services. Now, in particular, we are interested in research that could enhance the functionality of the Neutral Relay Services platform that was authorized by the Commission last year. To give you but one example, we're interested in whether real-time text capability would improve the quality of video relay service and caption telephone service. Now, the Neutral platform will be an open-source, SIP-based platform, and when it is built, it will be made open and available for researchers and programmers to tinker with and improve and to take ownership of in order to keep pace with evolving technologies. Now, on this particular project, it is an honor for me to be working with the co-creator of SIP, Henning Schultrini, who will describe the next portion of the item.
Thank you. As we transition to an all-IP environment, assignment of management of telephone numbers, even though typically considered a rather boring subject, can be simplified and made much more flexible. Even if it is behind the scenes, the simplification may help to dramatically reduce the number of illegal robocalls that we all enjoy, as well as to facilitate competition. In cooperation with standards bodies and as part of the North American Numbering Council, we intend to convene and invite industry stakeholders in a workshop soon to plan a neutral testbed to explore long-term technology options that make full use of the new capabilities in an all-IP environment. Beyond the experiments that were described earlier, which have heavily focused on collecting data, we also want to undertake a broader, more comprehensive assessment of how we can best collect data to better understand the enduring values and how they're impacted by the technology transitions on a national scale and for all population groups. We seek better information on key questions posed by the transition. Where are we in the transition? How are the transitions affecting these core values? What matters most to consumers and industry participants? And what trade-offs can we make that are acceptable? We wish to assess what data we collect now, where there are gaps, and how we can best fill those gaps. We intend to look at 3 key data sources: consumer complaints that we already collect and that we try to improve how we make use of that data, cooperating with states, looking at NG 911 deployments to facilitate and accelerate the deployment of IP-based next-generation 911 services, as well as other data sources on a broad set of topics from federal, state, and tribal government, as well as non-governmental organizations, inviting everybody to help us better understand and to make data-driven decisions on that. With that, I'll turn it back to John to describe our path forward from here.
We're at the moment, one might say, when the Commission is at the end of the beginning of its work on IP transitions. With the Commission's adoption of this order today, there will be a lot of work to do. And we just want to emphasize that these offices and these bureaus will continue to work in parallel as we await submissions and proposals for experiments. So, for example, coming into the spring, we expect to hold workshops on access to persons with disabilities. Per Henning's comments, a workshop on numbering. Also, we plan to have a meeting, a workshop on rural broadband, where we're hoping to learn more about what kind of proposals could work, what kind of deployment can best be achieved in rural America, and have a discussion of multiple options that could be embraced by the Commission. And finally, in April, David will be putting together a workshop on public safety so that the values and the progress that we've discussed today will be able to be embraced and commented upon by the public in a variety of different venues. We also plan to put forward this spring what we're calling a managerial framework. It will include a schedule by which the Commission will confront and answer the biggest questions about competition and other fundamental values in an all-IP world. Of course, it is very important, and this will be a significant focus of the work, that we protect the enduring value of competition as we move forward. The purpose of this framework is to tee up in an orderly and quick fashion to the Commission the big policy and legal issues that need to be answered. Last point. This table is not big enough to include everybody who worked very hard on the item and in the months that led to the item today. It includes Bureau heads like Chris Monteith and Roger Sherman and Julie Knapp who participated. It includes staff really from every bureau and office in the agency. It includes also colleagues like Sean Lev, our former general counsel, who led the task force in important moments as we got to this point, and Rebecca Goodhart and Patrick Haley, who served as deputy directors during that time when comments were being received. To all of them, we want to say thank you. And finally, with that, we simply would like to note that the task force, the bureaus, and the offices represented here recommend adoption of the item, and we request editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salat, and to everybody on the team, particularly the expanded team that you just called out. Thank you. Commissioner Clyburn.
I say this quite often when it comes to technology, that this is an exciting time to be in this space. While walking on the floor at CES earlier this month, I had a first-hand view of new and innovative products that are game-changing, mind-boggling, and life-altering. Full-color 3D printed confections, and yes, Mr. Chairman, I am still fixated on customized sweets. Can't get past it, I'm sorry. A device that augments previously inaudible sounds which could help wounded soldiers improve their hearing and quality of life. The concept cars of yesteryear are the smart cars of today and hold the promise of saving lives and avoiding collisions. Technological advancements and innovation abound with limitless potential. I am proud that during my tenure, the Commission has taken a number of actions to promote investment and innovation in this area. The National Broadband Plan will celebrate its 4th anniversary this March. It set forth a blueprint for the nation to move from legacy telephone services to broadband-enabled services in all sectors, including health and education, and recommended that the Commission update its policies to promote and reflect IP networks. Today's action is another in a series that the Commission has undertaken to implement many of these recommendations, including the landmark bipartisan reform of universal service and intercarrier compensation. In acting on these recommendations, the Commission found that these legacy systems not only were subsidizing services of a bygone era, but were deterring the transition to IP networks. The Commission provided a path to promote innovation by eliminating barriers to the transformation of today's telephone networks to the all-IP broadband networks of the future. In the 2 years since the Commission adopted the USF ICC Transformation Order, providers have increased their deployment of IP equipment and facilities, so much so that today we launch a process for interested parties to submit proposals for experiments which would shift entirely away from legacy equipment and facilities. I am pleased that the order recognizes what I have maintained all along, that the core values embodied in the Communications Act, competition, consumer protection, universal service, and public safety, do not change as technologies evolve and must guide the Commission's process going forward. While the transition holds potential for the introduction of next-generation 911, with features such as video call and more reliability and redundancy, there is also a risk of unintended consequences for consumers, public safety, and competition. The parameters for these experiments, including protections for consumers, public safety, and competition, as well as a means to identify data that will be useful for experiments, should provide the Commission and the states information needed to make decisions going forward. I am also pleased that the order instructs the Commission to consult with the state and tribal governments in geographic areas where entities propose a trial. At the same time, we must acknowledge that not everyone in this country has the luxury of being able to take advantage of those products, devices, and applications I saw at CES. Most of us in this room are fortunate to have the ability to be first adopters, but millions cannot because they live in rural areas. Millions more have access, but cannot afford to do so. The Commission has a duty, as provided in Section 254 of the Telecommunications Act, to close digital divides and ensure that all Americans, including low-income consumers and those in rural, insular, and high-cost areas, have access to advanced telecommunications and information services reasonably comparable to those in urban areas. I remain firmly committed to ensuring that the Commission lives up to this congressional mandate, and I believe that rural broadband trials in the order and further notice could be vehicles to help achieve these goals. The USF ICC Transformation Order sets up a process to give incumbent carriers the right of first refusal to accept or decline statewide support using a forward-looking cost model to provide broadband and voice to unserved areas. The Commission sought comment on the competitive process for distributing support in rural areas and support for the distribution support in areas where the incumbent declines the Connect America Fund Phase 2 statewide support. These rural broadband trials could help facilitate the Commission's ability to structure the competitive process, while the order makes clear that the distribution of Phase 2 support under the forward-looking cost model continues on a parallel track without delay. At the same time, these rural broadband experiments and the technology transitions present an incredible opportunity to explore how best to achieve the Commission's goals adopted in the USF ICC Transformation Order of ensuring universal availability of modern networks capable of providing voice and broadband services to homes, businesses, and community anchor institutions. Connecting anchor institutions was something I strongly advocated leading up to the adoption of the Transformation Order. I believe the Commission should leverage the Connect America Fund to support to achieve all of our obligations in Section 254, including serving rural and low-income consumers and connecting those anchor institutions and healthcare facilities. This order invites experiments to further explore these issues to ensure that the goals of connecting those institutions are realized. I appreciate the support of my request for comment on healthcare broadband experiments, which could ensure that consumers and healthcare providers in rural areas have access to advanced telemedicine and other remote monitoring services. Technological advancements are transforming the delivery of healthcare, and some Americans stand to be left behind because they either lack access or the means to these services. I believe our universal service mandate includes ensuring that these consumers have access to these advanced services, and I hope to work with the chairman and my colleagues to move quickly to adopt an order approving these healthcare trials. With regard to disability access, I am excited that the order adopts the proposed $3 million budget proposed in a video relay services reform order for research focusing on the impact of IP-based technologies and services for persons with disabilities. The goal is to ensure that the telecommunications relay services offer functionally equivalent voice services and improve the efficiency and availability of TRS. Research here could focus on the specific needs of this community, including effects on different demographics and the relationship with healthcare. The technology transitions have opened tremendous doors and opportunities for persons with disabilities, and I strongly encourage all parties to submit research proposals for the Commission's consideration to evaluate how to improve our TRS services. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I am pleased that my colleagues agreed with my suggestion to seek input of the Federal-State Joint Conference on Advanced Telecommunications Services, a request to help improve the Commission's own consumer complaint processes by learning best practices from the states. I believe we can learn much from our state partners, particularly on consumer complaints, something that they know very, very well. This item is comprehensive in scope, and I want to thank the chairman for his leadership and the dedicated team of public servants who work so diligently on this item. While the list, as we've heard from Mr. Salat, includes many talented staff in virtually all of the Commission's bureaus and offices, allow me to specifically thank Mr. Salat, Stephanie Weiner, Jonathan Chambers, Nick Alexander, Matthew Quinn, Julie Veach, Carol Maddy, and Henning Shuzrini. I'm doing better, Henning. David Simpson and Tim Selzig. I'm sure I've got that wrong, but thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosewars.
Thank you. It is cold up here.
It is. You want a jacket?
No, I mean, that's not a metaphor for anything, but it is cold up here. All right. Communications networks are changing at a blistering pace. Nothing demonstrates the speed and scope of this change like simple, raw numbers. At the turn of the millennium, we had roughly 200 million switched access lines, or traditional phone lines. By the start of this year, we had only 96 million. On top of that, we had 42 million VoIP lines, an increase of nearly 80% since 2008. Add to this the fact that 2 in 5 households have now cut the cord and only use a wireless phone, and you get a sense of the change that is roiling our communications landscape. Grappling with so much change is neither simple nor easy. The task is big, so here we start small. We start in what I like to think of as the sandbox. Now, as I've said before, software developers often code sandboxes into their programs. This code allows others to access a portion of the program without harming the host platform. It provides an opportunity to experiment within the program without minimizing risk before introducing ideas at a broader scale. Sandbox thinking is very popular among startups in Silicon Valley, but why not put it to use in Washington? After all, testing big ideas in a small way is a good way to understand the consequences of our policy choices and the impact they have on consumers before unleashing them in the world at large. That is what we do here by inviting a range of sandbox trials to assess how to migrate the networks we rely on today to the digital possibilities of tomorrow. I think this is the right approach for the IP transition issues before this commission, so our work here has my full support. But as we navigate these changes with our eyes firmly on the future, our efforts must be informed by the values of our past. As I have suggested from the start, there are 4 enduring values in communications law: public safety, universal access, competition, and consumer protection. These are our guideposts in everything we do. Technology changes, but our values do not. So I thank the chairman and my colleagues for including this framework in the work we do here. Now, ultimately, we will need to take these values and build beyond sandbox experimentation. I am confident that we will find that technology is up to this task. I am also confident that smart policy experts at the federal and state level can craft a framework that inspires investment in digital age infrastructure. But I think we must be mindful of the impact this transition has on consumers, their needs, their expectations, and their willingness to embrace network change. On this front, going forward, I believe all stakeholders have some work to do. Finally, I want to thank the chairman for tackling this issue with both gusto and speed. Big change is already underway. It is time to wrestle with it and make sure our new networks yield new possibilities for everyone. Thank you also to the many, many bureaus and offices that contributed to this effort today and undoubtedly will help us navigate these issues in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The IP transition is upon us. Each year, more and more Americans are leaving the public switched telephone network, or PSTN, opting instead for IP-based services. Indeed, through millions of individual decisions, American consumers are leading the way to an all-IP future. This is good news. IP networks provide better service quality and increased network capacity. They hold the promise of more effective emergency response through next-generation 911, to better healthcare through telemedicine, and to improved educational opportunities through distance learning. Almost a year ago, I called on the Commission to move forward with an all-IP pilot program, one that would give forward-looking companies a path to turn off their old TDM electronics in a discrete set of wire centers and migrate customers to an all-IP platform. Why? Because we cannot continue to require service providers to invest in both old networks and new networks forever. Every dollar that is spent maintaining the networks of yesterday is a dollar that cannot be invested in the networks of tomorrow, a proposition endorsed by the National Broadband Plan. And our goal should be to maximize investment in IP-based infrastructure so that high-speed broadband extends to every corner of this country. But we cannot just turn off the PSTN overnight. Instead, we first need to beta test the concept. We need to see what works and what doesn't. Albert Einstein had it right. A pretty experiment is in itself more valuable than 20 formulae extracted from our minds. With real-world experience and hard data in hand, we will be much better positioned to make the broader transition to an all-IP future. I am therefore pleased that today's order adopts an all-IP pilot program consistent with the 4 principles I set forth last year. First, carrier participation should be voluntary. And today, we announce that, quote, no provider will be forced to participate in an experiment. Second, trials should reflect the geographic and demographic diversity of our nation. And today, We, quote, seek experiments that cover areas with different population densities and demographics, different topologies, and or different seasonal and meteorological conditions, including Atlanta. Third, no one can be left behind. And today, we declare that, quote, no consumer may lose access to service or critical functionalities, and that residential and business customers must receive, and I quote again, clear, timely, and sufficient notice of any service-based experiment. Fourth and finally, we must be able to evaluate an all-IP trial with empirical data. And today, we seek, quote, experiments that collect and provide to the Commission data on key attributes of IP-based services. With these core principles in place, I'm optimistic that the trials are going to be a success. I'm especially happy that today's order moves forward with the all-IP pilot program on a unanimous, bipartisan basis. As I said when I first proposed the creation of an IP transition task force back in 2012, the IP transition is not an issue that divides the left from the right, Republicans from Democrats. And accordingly, today's order reflects our consensus that companies should have the opportunity to go all IP. What is more, today's order demonstrates that reaching an agreement does not mean compromising your values. Each of us might have preferred a somewhat different order. I know I speak for myself and John Chambers, for example, when I say that we would have preferred the entire Universal Service Fund to be redirected to the state of Kansas. It was not to be. But we were able to work collaboratively and meet in the middle, a testament to good government and one that hopefully bodes well as we continue moving to an all-IP future. Speaking of compromise, I appreciate the willingness of my colleagues to make clear that the rural broadband experiments proposed in this item will not undermine, and just as importantly, will not delay, moving forward with the second phase of the Connect America Fund to bring access to next-generation technologies to millions of rural Americans. And I welcome their willingness to propose redirecting the funding the Commission set aside in 2012 for a skilled nursing facility program. At the time, I argued that that program was unlawful and a mistake, and I hope that the record in this proceeding will help steer us toward a more constructive use of that funding. Finally, as our able General Counsel has pointed out, today's order is just one step on the path to an all-IP future. We are only beginning to embrace the IP transition. We still must repeal the many outdated rules on our books based on the principles of 19th century railroad regulation. We must still move forward with the consumer protections that will remain necessary in an all-IP world. We must still revisit and revise the architecture of the telephone network, following up on our recently completed VoIP numbering trials. And we must still turn to Congress for further guidance on our role as an agency in a 21st century communications marketplace. In other words, there is a lot to be done yet on the IP transition, and I'm looking forward to doing it along with my colleagues. I want to thank the entire Technology Transitions Policy Task Force, and I personally want to thank John Salat, the General Counsel, for his able expertise and frequent outreach to our office. We very much appreciate all that the task force has done to advance what I consider to be one of the most fundamental questions of our time in terms of policy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should start by saying I'm a bit under the weather, so if I sound a little bit more funny than normal, I apologize. Mr. Chairman, I will have a longer statement that I'll submit for the record, but this morning I'll offer a shorter statement focusing on the most important points. I should let you know that I'm leaving out all the flowery language I wrote about you to save some time. Today, the Commission is initiating a host of trials, experiments, research, test beds, and data initiatives intended to help understand some of the implications of moving to an all-IP world. While much of this discussion up till now has focused on service-based trials, where providers transition consumers from legacy voice technologies to modern ones, this item does much more. It launches new universal service programs. I commend the effort to tackle so many issues, and I appreciate the tireless effort of the Commission staff throughout the process to answer my questions and accommodate my suggestions. As a result of their hard work, I do approve the vast majority of this item. Rather than walk line by line through this item, I will highlight my main thoughts on two major parts. To start, I do approve the initiation of the proceeding to conduct service-based trials. Moving to an all-IP world raises a number of questions, and I hope the trials will provide an opportunity to answer some of those questions. I thank the chairman that this order also is consistent with my stated criteria. It makes clear that the trials will not interfere with the natural conversion that has been occurring and will continue to occur outside the trials, will not interfere with or delay the work of the commission, and will not be binding on what is happening outside the trials or on future decisions. The item also includes, at my suggestion, a 1-year sunset date on trial initiations to ensure that these tests will be timely and relevant. The layers of conditions and presumptions that the Commission establishes for a provider to gain approval to move forward with a service trial are numerous and complex and not what I would have written if I had the pen. I worry that with so many conditions, we are reducing the chances of companies filing applications. If few show up to do trials, it may interfere with the information we get back. But as many of the conditions and preemptions, such as those as cybersecurity, appear not to have a basis in the statute or existing rules. Others seem to expand the scope of existing Commission rules. Nonetheless, trial participation is voluntary, and participants will have the opportunity to seek waivers and rebut the presumptions. I look forward to reviewing the proposals that are filed and will give thorough consideration to any requests for relief. With respect to the item that establishes rural broadband experiments, I can only concur. To be clear, I support universal service and want to ensure that all Americans have access to modern communications networks. However, as contemplated, I'm concerned that these new experiments have the potential to divert from universal service funding and distract the Commission from completing the universal service reforms already adopted. I'm very pleased that the item makes clear that the experiments will not delay universal service reform established in the 2011 order. Indeed, the item commits to implementing key parts of Connect America Phase 2 and to address the challenges of providing remote service to remote areas by the end of this year. And while the experiments could be useful to help understand whether providers will be interested in serving rural America, particularly in the event that a current incumbent provider chooses not to participate in the universal service program going forward, I wonder whether the experiments will instead become an opportunity to use Connect America dollars that were intended to maximize voice and broadband coverage throughout the rural area and remote parts of our nation for other pet policy priorities. I'm also concerned over the appearance that the Commission overcollects funding from ratepayers and then uses the reserves funding to launch pilot programs or experiments. Instead of finding new ways to spend the reserves we build up, we should instead determine what our universal service program costs and set out collections according to the ratepayers accordingly, so ratepayers are not overburdened. Moreover, if these programs are not operating as intended, then we should amend them through the established notice and comment process rather than creating new pilot programs or experiments. I should say I want to thank the entire staff that has made presentations and everyone who has worked with my staff on this issue, including Jonathan Salet, Daniel Alvarez, Stephanie Weiner, and the rest of the folks at the panel have been exceptionally helpful. I should say, Mr. Chairman, I want to say a special word to Jonathan Salet, who spent extra time with me on this item and helped me understand a number of things going forward. So that was much appreciated on your behalf. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will follow on the precedent that you have established, Mike, in terms of having a statement for the record and summarizing it now. Although I don't have any nice flowery things to say about you in my statement. This has truly, as all my colleagues here have pointed out, this has not only been a team effort by this group, but by this group. And that is really significant. I agree with Commissioner Pai in his statement that what we're doing here is a big deal. This is an important moment, and all of the colleagues sitting up here have played a role in this, and the item is better for it. You know, we've been talking about network companies responding to technological and marketplace realities by shutting off traditional circuit switch service for some time. The companies have been indicating to us that they want to do something about their legacy networks. But to do that requires this agency to make very important decisions, to grant permission to do that. And that's not a decision process that should be taken lightly. As has been frequently stated over the last 100 years, consumers have begun to expect things, have had the right to expect things from their networks. And what we need to be doing as we consider this transition is figuring out how do we become well informed about how those kinds of expectations exist in an IP network. So we today invite service providers to propose voluntary experiments for all IP networks. Some folks have called this a technology trial. It is not a technology trial. We know how to build IP networks. But as Commissioner Rosenworcel said long ago, she talked about these enduring values that we've, I think, all pretty much referenced in one form or another up here this morning. Universal service, public safety, competition, and consumer protection. Those are the values against which we need to measure what happens in the trials. And at the risk of being considered repetitive, it also, in one of those four terms, is competition, competition, competition. Universal service has been a bedrock of telecommunications since Theodore Vail. He was the one that came up with the phrase universal service. While technology and the marketplace have evolved, the concept of universal service has remained immutable. Thus, inviting targeted experiments in universal service and focusing on extending the concepts of universal service in an all-digital age is an appropriate activity and an appropriate focus of our universal service funds. But universal service is not just geographic. All Americans have that access right, including Americans with disabilities. And I am particularly mindful of the trials that John Chambers was talking about and what we are going to be doing in these trials to focus on special communities that make up America. Along that line, what Commissioner Clyburn has done and referenced in her statement in terms of taking the lead for this agency on telehealth and making sure that the challenges and opportunities represented by an IP network for telehealth are fully trialed, fully realized in these activities is very important. Finally, I want to join everybody up here in a huge vote of thanks to each of the members of the task force, both those seated at the table and those not. And by the way, those not seated at the table include some that have already been named, but also include our previous chairman, Julius Janikowski, who started the task force on recommendation of another colleague here, and Sean Lev, who, as general counsel, was heading it up for quite a period. I want to join with my colleagues in thanking John Salet for his leadership on picking up this ball and moving it across the goal line. We think in football analogies where I come from, and grateful to you for that. And in a moment, we're going to talk about process reform. But in the context of this, let me comment, or let me do a little process reform. It's now time for this task force to exit stage left. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for the incredible contributions that you have made. We're going to replace the task force with a mesh network, to use a term that we'll also be trialing in the field. And to make sure that all of the bureaus and all of the offices have participation in that mesh network, taking the next step of this process forward. We believe that process reform begins with eliminating layering and empowering bureaus and offices with the responsibility to match their expertise. And that's how this mesh network is going to work. Finally, these are very big legal and policy questions that are raised by the IP transitions. Commissioner Rosenworcel's term enduring values tends to be internalized by many as consumer-facing issues. I know she doesn't consider it to be just consumer-facing issues. But it is inherent in the transition and the trials to make sure that we are maintaining competition and that we are maintaining, thus, the relationship between networks that allow that competition to happen. This is an exciting time. This is the culmination of a lot of hard work. And let's call for the vote. Sitting up here. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much to all of you. We request the editorial privileges it is granted. I'm sorry. And Madam Secretary, would you please announce our next item?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item will be presented by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. It is entitled Facilitating the Deployment of Text to 911 and Other Next 911 Applications Framework for Next Generation 911 Deployment.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Wheeler and Commissioners, today we present a policy statement and second further notice of proposed rulemaking that advances the Commission's core mission of promoting safety of life and property of the American public. Consistent with that obligation, the Commission has specific statutory responsibilities with respect to 911 service. Reliable access to emergency service communications is an enduring value Americans expect. As communications networks migrate to newer technologies and consumer habits change, we must make sure these changes preserve and improve Americans' access to critical life-saving services. In today's world, mobile wireless communications are increasingly central to the day-to-day lives of Americans, and mobile wireless usage is increasingly text-based. Text messaging enjoys wide consumer use. Yet if you send a text message to 911 during an emergency in most parts of our country, it won't be received. In light of these trends and the importance of ensuring effective 911 service, particularly for those who cannot access 911 call centers with a voice call, enabling text to 911 capability is a necessary first step in the development of next generation 911 capabilities. Additionally, being able to text during an emergency is essential for the tens of millions of Americans with hearing and speech disabilities. Texting can provide an additional means of contacting 911 when a voice call may place someone in danger, such as in an active shooter or domestic abuse situation. When voice networks are congested, text messages may provide an alternate means of getting through to 911 call centers. The major wireless carriers are meeting this challenge by developing text to 911 capability that will be in place this coming May. In addition, over 45 public safety answering points in 14 states are already accepting text to 911. We know the ability of these 911 call centers to receive texts has made a difference in consumers' lives. For example, in Vermont, we launched text to 911 in early 2012, Text to 911 has enabled first responders to intervene in and even stop suicide attempts and domestic violence situations. To further this important service for consumers, today's policy statement expresses the Commission's intent to pursue a technologically neutral approach to text to 911 that will establish functional standards for all stakeholders in the industry and the public safety community. The policy statement recognizes the leadership role that the 4 largest wireless carriers have taken in working with NENA and APCO, and encourages other wireless providers and interconnected text providers that are not parties to the carrier NENA-APCO agreement to work with the public safety community to develop similar commitments to support text to 911 in a timely manner, so that all consumers will be assured access to text to 911 regardless of what text provider they choose. If the multi-stakeholder process achieves these values in a timely manner, the policy statement establishes the expectation that the Commission rules would be needed only to codify the multi-stakeholder standard so it applies to all providers equally, including future entrants into the market, in a manner that brings regulatory clarity so that all participants in the 911 ecosystem can plan accordingly. This policy statement and second further notice represent sustained effort and hard work by Bureau staff, and we appreciate the coordinating efforts of many people throughout the Commission. I would like to give special thanks to our Deputy Bureau Chief, David Firth, as well as Erica Olson, the Bureau's Senior Legal Advisor, Tim May, E911 and Next Generation 911 Projects Manager, Nikki McGinnis, Dana Zellman, David Seal, and Eric Ehrenreich in our Policy Division. I also want to thank Henning Schultzreen, our Chief Technologist, Karen Pelt-Strauss and Cheryl King in the Disability Rights Office of the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau, Chuck Needy in the Office of Strategic Planning, Michael Jansen and Brian Regan in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Bill Richardson and Brendan Carr in the Office of the General Counsel. I would like to now introduce Tim May, who will present the second further notice of proposed rulemaking in more detail. Tim?
Thank you, Admiral Simpson. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Bureau is pleased to present a second further notice of proposed rulemaking, or notice, that seeks comment on certain aspects of the technical provision of text to 911 by all text providers, with particular emphasis on interconnected text providers. Among other things, the item seeks additional comment on time frames for implementation of text to 911 capability, over-the-top or OTT text to 911 message delivery models, costs associated with text to 911, public safety answering point or PSAP implementation issues, provision of Phase 2 E911 equivalent location information for covered text providers, roaming, liability, waiver standards, and the evolution of text messaging usage by consumers. With respect to time frames for implementation, the notice proposes that text to 911 capability should be made available by all text providers no later than December 31st, 2014, and should be provided within a reasonable time after a PSAP has made a valid request for service, not to exceed 6 months. We seek comment on this proposal, particularly with respect to carriers and interconnected text providers that are not parties to the carrier NENA-APCO agreement. The notice also addresses technical issues that interconnected text providers may face in routing and transmitting text to a PSAP. In general, we anticipate that these providers will utilize SMS-based protocols to route emergency text over an underlying carrier's SMS network. The item describes 4 possible technical approaches and seeks comment on the technical feasibility of each. The notice also requests comment on implementation costs, necessary software changes, handset development cycles, and security issues. The notice emphasizes that where the underlying SMS network is used to support delivery of interconnected text to PSAPs, reasonable compensation to the underlying network provider may be appropriate. Our interconnected text proposal, however, does not constrain CMRS providers from transitioning their SMS platforms to new technologies if they choose to do so at some future point. The notice also seeks comment on barriers confronting PSAP's implementation of text to 911 and what additional measures the Commission can take consistent with its authority, which may encourage more rapid uptake by PSAPs or other emergency response authorities. The item seeks specific comment on how the Commission can assist in promoting action by PSAPs and others to overcome funding or other implementation obstacles. The notice recognizes the significance of the voluntary commitment that the four major carriers have entered into with NENA and APCO, and proposes a framework for encouraging similar voluntary industry commitments that will benefit the public interest. The notice proposes that any rules adopted in this proceeding should provide a safe harbor option for companies that have entered into a voluntary agreement with public safety that the Commission has determined serves the public interest. Under this approach, a company entitled to the safe harbor would have an initial opportunity to correct any lapses in its commitment without fear of enforcement. The notice seeks comment on this approach, including whether there are circumstances where the safe harbor should not apply, methods to measure compliance and ensure accountability, and when commitments subject to the safe harbor agreements may need to be reevaluated due to changed circumstances. The notice also seeks comment on elements that we anticipate will be part of the long-term evolution of Text 911, though we do not propose to implement them by a date certain. These include applying the same Phase 2 location accuracy requirements to 911 texts that currently apply to 911 voice calls. The notice recognizes that text providers face current technical difficulties in providing Phase 2 location information for text to 911 messages, and therefore seeks comment on ongoing standards work or other industry developments that could support this capability in the future. The notice also seeks comment on what action is needed to extend text to 911 so that it would be available to consumers while roaming. Finally, the notice seeks comment on how to ensure that text to 911 keeps pace with the long-term evolution of text services and associated consumer expectations regarding text access to 911. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Commissioner Clyburn.
One of the most necessary, challenging, yet rewarding aspects of this job is the ability to negotiate and deliver some incredible opportunities for the people we serve through policymaking. One thing not on the table for debate or negotiation, however, is ensuring that our public safety policies keep pace with the evolving demand for mobile communication services so that all Americans may benefit from the advantages new technologies have to offer. Just a short while ago, we were talking about how SMS texting was becoming more popular than voice calls. Now industry analysts debate whether over-the-top texting, which allows users to send free messages to those using the same apps, will eclipse basic SMS texting in popularity. Little known tech history fact. In mid-2013, the 6 most popular over-the-top text applications averaged nearly 19 billion messages per day. Did you know that, Ajit? I told you. For the millions of Americans who live with hearing and speech challenges, SMS and over-the-top texting services are invaluable. They also help in situations when a voice call to 911 may be dangerous, such as during a home invasion, or when voice calls are being blocked due to unusual network congestion. For these reasons, it is important that we continue to promote greater deployment and adoption of text to 911 services. Today's item builds upon the voluntary commitments made by 4 nationwide wireless carriers, and I wish to thank them once again, along with APCO and NENA, for their efforts to promote timely deployments of text to 911 services to PSAPs. To ensure these public safety services are available to all wireless consumers, we acknowledge that there is still more work to do. So I am pleased that this item seeks comment on a number of important aspects that will be a part of the long-term evolution of text to 911 services. These elements include providing more precise location information in conjunction with emergency text, delivering text to 911 over non-cellular data channels, and supporting text to 911 for consumers while roaming on CMRS networks. Admiral Simpson and his staff at the Public Safety Homeland Security Bureau are to be commended for their great work on this item. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
The first telephone number I taught my children was 911. It is a number that every one of us knows by heart, but every one of us hopes that we will never have to use. As the old saying goes, you may only call 911 once in your life, but it will be the most important call you ever make. The challenge to our continued success of 911 is the increasing complexity of our communication systems. Every new way of reaching out creates new possibilities, but also new difficulties. Still, over time, we have made steady progress bringing new technology into the 911 framework. We expanded 911 service to mobile phones, facilitated development of handset and network solutions for location technology, and we made 911 an essential feature of interconnected VoIP. Just last month, in one of Chairman Wheeler's first acts, the Commission took important steps to make sure our 911 infrastructure is more reliable when disaster strikes. This is good stuff. Today, we build on these earlier efforts to make 911 service more accessible. We adopt a policy statement calling on wireless carriers to support text to 911 capabilities. We also tee up questions about roaming cost and promoting adoption in a related rulemaking. I know texting to 911 can save lives. That is because I have seen it in action in 911 call centers in Vermont and Maryland. I also know this service could be a game changer for those who are deaf, hard of hearing, or have speech disabilities. So both the policy statement and the rulemaking have my full support. But with as much as we have accomplished, more work lies ahead. That is because there are some stubborn gaps in our policies that deserve our attention. This includes indoor wireless location accuracy. That may sound complicated, but the premise is simple. No matter where you are when you call 911, and no matter what kind of phone you use, you want first responders to find you. When you call 911 from a wired phone, first responders know where you are and where to send help. When you call 911 from a wireless phone outdoors, the Commission has standards that help ensure first responders can locate you and send assistance. But when you call from a wireless phone indoors, you should cross your fingers because no location accuracy standards apply. That is an unacceptable gap in our policies. After all, today more than 70% of calls to 911 are made from wireless phones. That is more than 400,000 calls a day. A lot of those calls are made from indoors. So I think it's time for this Commission to address this problem. But our work cannot end there. My colleague, Commissioner Pai, has highlighted another critical gap in our 911 infrastructure. So many of our nation's hotels and office buildings rely on multi-line telephone systems for voice service. Although these systems may serve us well when we work and travel, they can come up short in an emergency. I'm happy to see that Commissioner Pai is working to find a solution. His efforts also have my full support. Finally, thank you to the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for your work. It may be a number we may never want to call, but every one of us is grateful for the time you spend on 911. Thank you also to the Chairman for making this and public safety a priority.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The deployment of Next Generation 911, or NG 911, holds great promise for improving our nation's emergency response capabilities. I personally am a strong supporter of NG 911, and I'm pleased to vote for today's item because I'm optimistic that it will help bring text to 911 functionality to the American people for the first time. This is good news for the deaf and hard of hearing, as well as those with speech impediments. This is good news for victims of domestic violence and others whose lives may depend on nonverbal communication during an emergency. And this is good news for any American who, for whatever reason, cannot place a voice call to first responders. But as we move forward in this proceeding, we must remember this. Whenever possible, Americans should call, not text, 911. For one thing, most public safety answering points, or PSAPs, are currently unable to accept and process text messages, which means that calls will go through in many places where text cannot. For another thing, a call gives first responders more concrete location information, as well as better situational awareness. And that's why public safety organizations agree that the right decision is to talk rather than text whenever possible. I, too, want to thank the diligent staff of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, ably led by Admiral Simpson, for their willingness to incorporate my input into this item. I look forward to continuing to work with them and my colleagues on this important issue. Finally, as innovative as text to 911 functionality is, I want to close by noting that we still have a ways to go on some of the 911 basics. In particular, as my colleague Commissioner Rosenworcel pointed out, Americans expect, if they call 911 from a hotel, a motel, or an office building, that they will reach someone who can help. But the nation last month learned, in painful detail, that isn't always true. On December 1st, Carrie Renee Hunt Dunn met her estranged husband in a Marshall, Texas hotel room so he could visit with their 3 children, ages 9, 4, and 3. Almost as soon as she arrived with her children, Carrie's husband forced her into the bathroom and began stabbing her. Carrie's 9-year-old daughter did exactly what every child is taught to do during an emergency. She picked up the phone and she dialed 911. The call didn't go through, so she tried again, and again, and again. All in all, she dialed 911 4 times. Those were the most important calls she ever made, probably ever will make, but she never reached emergency personnel. Why? Because the hotel's phone system, or MLTS as it's known in the industry, required her to dial 9 to get an outside line. Tragically, Carrie died as a result of this vicious attack. Carrie's daughter behaved heroically under horrific circumstances, but the hotel's phone system failed her family, and, of course, failed her mother. Earlier this month, I began an inquiry to determine what steps can be taken to prevent tragedies like Carrie's from happening again. I'm enormously gratified by the reaction I've received so far from the industry and from individuals alike. Awareness of this problem clearly is on the rise, and I've heard of self-executing solutions everywhere from Lubbock to Los Angeles. Our nation's hotel industry has already formed a task force to tackle the issue, and I look forward to working with them, as well as public safety organizations, closely in the time to come. Carrie is gone, and there is nothing that we can do to bring her back. But her death will not be in vain if we can take action to ensure that whenever someone dials 911, they connect with the trained emergency personnel who can help. That's the message that I heard when I had the privilege of speaking to Carrie's father recently. And over the coming weeks and months, that's exactly what I intend to do. I appreciate the support of my colleague, Commissioner Rosenworcel, from the chairman, and from many others around this country who have emailed, tweeted, and called me to let them know that this issue really matters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you. I have a longer statement, but I hope to make 6 points. Point 1, I do support the item before us, and I will vote for its approval. Today's inquiry into text to 911 capability, but I do have some concerns and questions on this item going forward. Point 2, I am concerned about our legal authority to regulate in this area. The law here is complex, and I look forward to engaging with commenters to ensure that we are applying it correctly. It's not so clear to me yet. Point 3, I must admit that I'm disappointed in the inadequacy of the record to date. I hope commenters will provide up-to-date statistics regarding Americans' expectations and technology capabilities associated with text to 911. I look forward to hearing from all users about the benefits and potential drawbacks of current texting technologies. Further, we need to engage with interconnected text providers, many of which have not been active in this proceeding. How is it possible that my staff and I could not find information in the record beyond one short ex parte letter from the top 3 over-the-top text providers? Then again, it is possible they're filed under a different name. Point 4, I'm particularly interested in learning more about from stakeholders about the cost of implementing text to 911 and the repercussions of the regulatory mandates could have on texting application businesses. If our regulations drive over-the-top text providers to stop offering their applications, how does that impact the market? Point 5. I'm extremely troubled by the suggestion of expanding text to 911 requirements to additional non-traditional applications such as non-interconnected text messaging. There are many questions such as statutory authority and whether it is technically feasible or achievable for these applications to connect to 911, and that need to be answered before I will contemplate going down this path. These application providers, coders, are the definition of true innovators, and we must be very, very cautious in this space. Point 6, and this gets to a point that was raised by Commissioner Pai and Commissioner Rosenworcel. And it's a difficulty of the 911 versus getting an outside line and 911. It's my understanding, and my staff was doing diligence here, that the FCC requires 9911 to be dialed before it can reach an entity of emergency. I hope we can resolve that situation. We should not be operating from a glass house ourselves. I want to thank the chairman and his staff for incorporating several of my proposed edits, and the staff of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their hard work on this item. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. You know, we just finished an item where we talked a lot about network values, and there's none bigger than public safety. You've heard us all talk about that up here. As Commissioner Rosenworcel has said, at the last meeting, we dealt with the reliability of 911 networks. And as both Commissioner Rosenworcel and Commissioner Clyburn have indicated, we need to be looking forward in terms of next generation 911 services, including mobile indoor location services. And so I'll let the cat out of the bag and say that we will be announcing today that is on the next meeting agenda. We also, Commissioner Pai, owe you a big debt of gratitude for your stepping up and the way you have handled that tragedy and the way in which your actions have reflected upon all of us who have the privilege of sitting up here on the dais. And we wish you Godspeed, and you've got our support as to how we move forward on these kinds of voluntary activities, because you know how we feel about voluntary activities. Commissioner Clyburn has the statistic du jour. 19 billion text messages. I didn't know that. And texting has moved from an ancillary service to an essential service. And as has been pointed out by everyone, it's even more important for certain segments of our society. Let me share with you a couple of stories. The other day I met with Edley Paez, who was a student at Gallaudet, who told a story that will just curl your hair, that she was with her sister, who was choking and couldn't speak, and she couldn't get to 911 because she's hard of hearing and cannot speak. And so she texted her mother at the office in the hopes that her mother was watching her text so that her mother would call 911. Fortunately, her mother was, and fortunately it had a happy ending. But the kind of things we're talking about today can solve that problem. Or I met with Ben Bahan, whose entire family is deaf, including his diabetic son. And he talks about the concern he has about having a son who has a precarious health condition, and how can he summon help. And he said something to me that I wrote down. He said, "This idea allows me to take control of my life." What a concept. And that's what we're doing here today. This is also a great example of the regulatory seesaw. Late in 2012, the 4 largest wireless carriers agreed with NENA and APCO to a plan that would implement Text to 911 this year. Unfortunately, however, many over-the-top text providers didn't similarly step up. And today, we're seeking comment on whether those folks should step up. Texting is texting. And we're also seeking comment on how in a regulatory environment you deal with those who stepped up responsibly and those who had to be regulatorily have some regulatory imposition put on with them, and whether there ought to be a difference in expectations. Finally, let me say to our public safety friends, as has been mentioned up here already, we're already looking at what are the barriers that PSAPs experience. But it's been more than a year since wireless carriers serving 90% of all the wireless subscribers in America pledged to do Text to 911, and the response from the PSAPs has been underwhelming. Only a handful of PSAPs have put this capability in place. As we begin this process, we call on the PSAPs to get with it. That the industry has done its part, the FCC has done its part. Now it's time for the PSAPs to do their part. We don't have regulatory authority over the PSAPs, but we can monitor and report on the activities of the PSAPs, and we do, as Commissioner Pai indicated. We'll be watching. It's time to step up. The kinds of things that Edley and Ben and so many others have talked about in terms of how this can be life-saving and change lives is an important thing. And I might also point out how terrific it would be when, not if, when an individual who is involved in an automobile crash, for instance, or comes across some kind of other tragedy, can take a picture and send it in a text message to the PSAP, so that the PSAP then has information that will help them determine, are the jaws of life necessary? Do we need to send some kind of special medical team there? That has to start with this. First, you have to be able to receive a Text 911 call. This opens the door to all kinds of other things. And finally, to my hearing impaired friends, I just want to say one thing. This is only the start. Thank you. Okay, we will proceed to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Can I text in my vote? Or?
You can text it. You can set it by any means possible. Okay. Any means possible. I just
there are 19 billion of them, right?
Is that?
Oh, I know. Aye.
This is. Thank you. I just wanted to. I wanted to hear the magic word. Okay. The ayes have it. The order is carried. Thank you very much, Admiral, Tim, David. The request for editorial privileges is granted. We're rolling at 5-0 here twice. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, next on your agenda today is a presentation by the Incentive Auction Task Force with an update on the timeline and project plan for the Broadcast Television Incentive Auction.
The chair recognizes the incredibly dapper. I'm trying to make some, those ecclesiastical colors almost. Mr. Lake.
Sweaters seem to be in these days.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry. Sorry. If you could only have dressed right,
I am the incredibly undapper Mr. Epstein.
Yes, sir, Mr. Epstein.
Good morning. By 5 minutes, Chairman Wheeler, Commissioners Clyburn, Rosenworcel, Pye, and O'Reilly. My colleagues and I are pleased to be here today to update you on the Incentive Auction Task Force progress towards implementing the Broadcast Television Spectrum Auction. As Chairman Wheeler stated in his December 6th blog, The Path to a Successful Incentive Auction, today's briefing will provide more details about the timeline and milestones in the incentive auction proceeding. Joining me at the table today are Bureau Chiefs Bill Lake of the Media Bureau, Mindel de la Torre of the International Bureau, and Roger Sherman of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, along with Matthew Hussey, Associate Chief of the Office of Engineering and Technology. I think we have some slides. There we go. To begin, I'd like to lay out the objectives that have guided and will continue to guide us throughout the remainder of the proceeding. We will develop fact-based policy recommendations in an open and transparent manner. This means relying on the best possible data and using this data to inform our recommendations. It also means sharing our information with the public so that they may evaluate and test our methods and conclusions. Encourage stakeholder involvement and carefully consider their input. We've had nearly 400 ex-parte meetings to date in this proceeding. The task force has accepted virtually every ex-parte meeting request received. We've also released public notices and held workshops on a wide range of key issues. These outreach issues have been and will be critical to developing our recommendations for the report and order. Ramp up outreach and education to broadcasters. To date, we've conducted broadcaster outreach and education through numerous workshops, webinars, ex-parte meetings, and conferences. This approach has been fruitful, but as the auction approaches, we recognize that we must increase our general approach as well as engage specific stations and broadcaster constituency in targeted markets. Create a user-friendly and exhaustively tested auction system. As the chairman mentioned in his blog, we will check and recheck our auction systems against auction requirements under a variety of scenarios. In addition to the mock auction that we traditionally hold for qualified bidders prior to our spectrum auctions, we will conduct software demonstrations that will serve two purposes. First, they will enable us to develop better user interfaces in advance of the auction, and second, they will educate and prepare potential participants to use the system under auction conditions. The next two slides detail our efforts to engage the public to date. Familiar to those who are closely following this proceeding, they include the usual comment and reply comment process, as augmented by over 400 ex-parte meetings, several public notices and workshops, and a series of task force presentations at Commission open meetings. This slide provides the roadmap through the incentive auction and beyond. The report and order is our next major milestone. The timeline is divided into 4 sections. The rulemaking section, which results in a report and order this spring. The pre-auction process, which runs from the adoption of the R&O to the auction. The incentive auction itself, and finally, the post-auction transition. Throughout the entire process, we'll continue to advance our international coordination with Canada and Mexico. As I mentioned earlier, a core objective is to encourage stakeholder input. We've issued several public notices on specific topics where the staff believed further discussion and public comment would enrich the record. For purpose of this presentation, I want to focus on the 3 recent or pending notices. Geographic license areas, managing inter-service interference, and repacking feasibility checking. In the cases of geographic license areas and managing inter-service interference, early stakeholder engagement made it clear that further input from the public would enrich the record and make decision-making more meaningful. Releasing a public notice on repacking feasibility checking was in keeping with our commitment to provide transparency into repacking and auction design. In addition to these public notices, we will continue to hold workshops and webinars on topics that warrant further opportunities for explanation and public discussion, and we're dedicating more resources to expanding broadcaster education and outreach. The task force remains committed to maintaining an open door to all parties on all issues. We will provide additional opportunities for public input as key issues arise. I want to now briefly discuss each of the 3 recent public notices. Last month, we released a public notice on geographic license areas. The issue of such areas has been part of the incentive auction discourse from the beginning of the proceeding. The Spectrum Act requires that the Commission consider assigning licenses that cover different geographic areas. The notice sought comment on the appropriate size of geographic license areas and proposed using economic areas or EAs. Commenters advocated a range of sizes, including nationwide licenses, EAs, CMAs, and even licensing by individual counties. In late November, the Competitive Carrier Association submitted a new alternative for smaller license areas, which they called partial economic areas, based upon CMA boundaries and nesting within EAs. Recognizing the potential value of further input on this important issue, we issued a public notice seeking comment on CCA's proposed licensing approach, as well as potential package bidding options. Earlier this month, we released a public notice on repacking feasibility checking, which is the process of quickly checking during the auction whether a TV station can be assigned a channel that meets all interference and other constraints to channel assignments. This public notice is the most recent in our series of notices on critical elements of the repacking process, which includes last February's TV study software public notice and last July's repacking data public notice. It provides interested parties with detailed methodological information about how a feasibility check could be performed. As with the earlier repacking PNs, we expect interested parties to use this information along with other repacking information that we've released to date and conduct their own repacking feasibility checks and evaluate the approaches that the staff has been examining. In connection with this, we're going to be hosting a workshop on repacking feasibility checking on February 21st to provide interested parties with additional opportunity to discuss and provide input with respect to this key repacking element. Yesterday, we released a public notice on a methodology for managing inter-service interference, an issue intrinsically linked to geographic market variation. Accommodating market variation has been a central focus of our band plan discussion since we identified the possibility that the auction could recover varying amounts of spectrum in different places. In response to the notice and subsequent band plan public notice, commenters raised concerns about how accommodating market variation could create co-channel and adjacent channel interference between television and wireless services in different markets. Recognizing the importance of this interference issue, we formed an internal working group to examine possible solutions and held a series of ex-parte meetings with interested parties. Some comments in the record have proposed establishing a fixed, predefined geographic separation between TV and wireless services. Such an approach may be spectrally inefficient and overly conservative, however, because it does not take into account such factors such as specific technical characteristics of each TV station, the levels of interference to wireless license areas that may be manageable through system design, the population of the affected areas, or the effect of intervening terrain. Given the care that we are exercising to understand and accurately calculate the specific interference relationship between individual broadcast stations, it seems appropriate to use a similar standard in evaluating interference between broadcast and wireless services. Yesterday's public notice seeks comment on a methodology to perform such an analysis. We'll host a workshop on inter-service interference on February 21st. The report in order is scheduled to be presented for the Commission's consideration in the spring of 2014. In it, the staff will recommend the Commission adopt rules establishing the framework of the incentive auction. The staff recommendations in the R&O will address all of the major components of the broadcast incentive auction, including how the reorganized 600 megahertz band plan should be structured, the appropriate design approaches for the reverse and forward auctions, how the reverse and forward auctions will be integrated, and the full range of post-auction transition issues. For many issues, these recommendations will include for Commission consideration specific detailed proposals for auction rules. Other issues, however, are dependent upon the Commission's determinations in the report and order, and consistent with established Commission practice in previous auction proceedings, the basic rules and structure adopted in the R&O will be further developed in the subsequent auction comment and procedures process. After the release of the report and order, the Commission's work implementing the auction will continue. Important parts of the process will be the auction comment public notice, which will seek additional comment on specific key auction policy determinations, such as the activity rule and price increments. The procedures public notice, which will incorporate the public input received in response to the auction comment public notice and announce final procedures and auction rules. During this period, after the R&O, we will emphasize our broadcaster outreach and education efforts to ensure that broadcasters understand the auction and repacking rules and procedures and are able to use this information to make informed decisions about auction participation. As I mentioned earlier, this outreach will engage specific stations and broadcaster constituencies in targeted markets. In early 2015, we will begin accepting applications from bidders interested in participating in the reverse and forward auctions, and as the Chairman has announced, we intend to hold the auction in mid-2015. As I mentioned earlier, we will also continue to advance our international coordination efforts with Canada and Mexico. In parallel with the rulemaking process, we have been and will continue to develop and test components of our auction system and integrate them into a functioning whole. Certain elements of the auction system, such as the TV study software, have already been subject to extensive review, while other elements, such as feasibility checkers, are currently being considered by the Commission. The reverse and forward auction bidding systems are dependent upon determinations to be made by the Commission, and they will be made available to the public following the report and order. As Chairman Wheeler and all of the Commissioners have made clear, the auction will start only when the system is ready, user-friendly, and thoroughly tested. Finally, our post-auction payments, licensing, and filing procedures are critical components of the auction. We continue to work on developing the processes for payments and licensing and intend to recommend details about these processes in the report and order. Before I conclude, I want to briefly discuss two important recent developments. First, I want to applaud Los Angeles station KLCS, a public broadcasting station, and KJLA, a local affiliate of Spanish language network LATV, for proposing a channel sharing pilot project. I also applaud CTIA, the Wireless Association, and the Association of Public Television Stations for supporting this effort. Commission staff has long encouraged such pilots, believing that they could demonstrate the valuable option that channel sharing may provide for certain broadcasters and serve as a proof of concept for other stations across the country that are considering their options in the incentive auction. We intend to review and act upon their filing expeditiously. Second, I want to welcome my good friend and colleague Howard Simons to the Commission as Vice Chair of the Incentive Auction Task Force. I've known Howard for many years, and there is no one that I would rather have working with us to ensure the successful implementation of the broadcast incentive auction. He is an exceptional talent, and the Commission will benefit by having Howard on board. Finally, I'd like to thank our hardworking and dedicated staff who represent 5 bureaus and offices in the Commission and who have collaborated to consistently provide top-notch results on very aggressive timeframes. Thank you, Chairman Wheeler and Commissioners Clyburn, Rosenworcel, Pai, and O'Reilly for the opportunity to update you on the Incentive Auction Task Force work.
Thank you, Mr. Epstein. Commissioner Clyburn.
A couple of weeks ago, I met with my newly appointed communications counterparts in Mexico, and 3 things were reaffirmed for me. First, When your day job is in Washington, D.C., Mexico City is a great place to be in January. I really can't feel my feet right now. I'm serious. Okay, it's gone. Okay, second, more seriously, even though I really was kind of serious about that first one, our regulatory neighbors truly appreciate this agency's coordination efforts on the 600 megahertz band issues and recognize how this can offer mutual benefits to both countries. Third, as Mexico undertakes a comprehensive effort to implement unprecedented constitutional reforms to expand advanced communications networks and promote competition, they will closely monitor the principles we use for the world's first ever voluntary incentive auction. Despite the several technical and policy questions that implementation of this auction may raise, I commend the task force for remaining focused on this incredible opportunity to strengthen both our mobile and broadcast industries. During disasters such as Superstorm Sandy, broadcasters, as our first informers, often provide the only means by which citizens receive critical information. When trying to implement a challenging regulatory initiative, it is important for us to continue to engage all stakeholders in order to resolve these most complicated of issues. But I am pleased to note this afternoon that this has been one of the top guiding principles. I'm not being critical. I'm cold. For this task force from the beginning. On the most serious issues, I am encouraged, and others remain encouraged, by the dialogue through several fora, including public notices, workshops, webinars, and ex parte meetings. In the past 2 months alone, the task force has released 3 public notices on the feasibility of reassigning TV stations to certain channels, inter-service interference, and geographic license areas for the forward auction. This morning, I was particularly pleased to hear that the staff will launch a more targeted outreach and education program for broadcasters. It will keep an open record policy on all issues, and it will exhaustively test the auction's programs and continue to engage stakeholders after the report and order until the auction is held. So I commend the stakeholders who have remained constructively engaged in this proceeding. Most notably, I would like to thank Gary Epstein. How did you describe him? Anyway, we're really kind of matching, Bill Lake. We've got, I don't quite know what that means, but you look great, as we've heard. Thank you. Roger Sherman, Mendel De La Torre, who always looks great, and Matthew Hussey. The jury's still out on you. Thank you. It was just your turn. I'm sorry. Seriously, thank you all for preparing this morning's update. Thank you.
It's a tough crowd up here. Mr. Rosenworcel.
It's chilly, that's why.
That's right, we're bringing in hot food.
Like my colleagues, I was privileged to be able to attend the Consumer Electronics Show earlier this month. It's a gadget geek heaven. I saw so many glassy screens, innovative applications, and cloud-based concepts. But what struck me most was the talk. Everywhere I heard mobile, mobile, mobile. And for me, that means spectrum, spectrum, spectrum. Because spectrum is the consummate scarce resource, and we're not in the business of making more. But to meet the demands of the new mobile economy, we are in the business of using what we have more efficiently. That is why the wireless auctions this agency conducts are so important. That is why the incentive auctions we will conduct are especially critical. If we get them right, we will demonstrate to the world that there are novel ways to reclaim spectrum and repurpose old airwaves for new mobile broadband use. That is exciting and terribly complicated. So it's a good thing that we have an extraordinary team assembled to do this job. During the team's last presentation this past summer, I described 2 objectives that are essential for successful incentive auctions. I think today's presentation is evidence that we have made significant progress on both fronts. First, transparency. The virtuous efforts of our auction experts will not matter if their good work is held in obscurity. So the roadmap we have here will provide guidance about what decisions have been made and what decisions remain. Going forward, we need to make our calendar clear. Milestones demonstrate progress and increase trust in our process. So too do the public workshops on relocation, repacking, and a whole host of other issues. Second, participation. As has been said before, we do not want to hold a party and have nobody show up. So our outreach to broadcasters must be more than broad. It must be targeted. One-to-many efforts are not enough. One-to-one outreach is essential. In addition, demonstrating that channel sharing is viable is important if we want to increase and have broad participation. So kudos to Los Angeles stations KLCS and KJLA for working with the wireless industry in a frequency sharing pilot. Finally, I think there is something else that can guide us through the work ahead. Over the past several years, the Commission has been able to recruit talented young legal professionals through an honors attorney program. I know because I have one of them working in my office. But I think this program needs an engineering counterpart. An honors engineering program would bring new vigor to the ranks of our technical staff by mixing young men and women. With experienced engineers already here, the Commission could be better prepared to face the challenges of incentive auctions and a gadget-filled mobile future built on Spectrum. So thank you to the incentive auction team for this update. Welcome to Howard, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by dissenting from the implication that one might draw from the bench that Gary is not dapper as well. Anyone who gets his hair cut by Antonino Calabro is dapper by definition. I'm going to leave it at that.
One might say you have struck us speechless.
Yes. Much has been said at previous Commission meetings about the upcoming incentive auction, and I'm quite sure that much more is going to be said at future meetings. So my remarks this morning are going to be limited to 3 basic points. First, I want to applaud Chairman Wheeler for his continuing focus, on ensuring that the technological components of the auction are rigorously tested beforehand. Under the law, as everyone knows, the FCC is given only one chance to conduct a successful incentive auction. And so in my view, we need to heed the wise words of that noted American philosopher, Billy Joel, who said, "Got to get it right the first time. That's the main thing. You get it right the next time, that's not the same thing." I agree with him. And one of the first things that we need to do in order to get that right is the repacking software. To do that, we should enlist assistance from stakeholders prior to the auction. Specifically, once the Commission has decided upon a repacking methodology, we should set up an expert group with representation from broadcasters, wireless carriers, consumer electronics manufacturers, and other interested parties. This group would test the software implementing the Commission's methodology, and it would produce a report for the Commission, identifying any problems and making recommendations for fixing them. After that, we should repeat the process with other auction-related software, and especially with testing integration, making sure all of the pieces work together during the load and stress of an actual auction. Second, we need to redouble our outreach efforts to broadcasters. If there is not sufficient broadcaster participation in the reverse auction, the incentive auction will fail. It is as simple as that. I'm therefore pleased that the task force in today's presentation indicates that it plans, quote, increased robust broadcaster education and outreach. One suggestion I have is to focus on the incentive part of the incentive auction. I've heard repeatedly from interested broadcasters a message that brings to mind that famous line from Jerry Maguire, "Show me the money." Simply put, broadcasters want some idea of how much money they could receive by participating in the auction, and they want to know soon. I believe that we should let each broadcaster in the United States know as quickly as possible how much participating in the reverse auction might bring in for its stations. In short, we need to turn the abstract concept of the incentive into the concrete reality of cash. We also need to let broadcasters know that participating in the reverse auction doesn't necessarily mean exiting the industry. The channel sharing and UHF to VHF options allow broadcasters to stay on the air while getting new funding that can strengthen their operations. Let's partner with someone broadcasters trust, say the National Association of Broadcasters, to conduct a joint education campaign that will present straightforward and objective information to broadcasters across the country. NAB has stated publicly that it is committed to helping the Commission conduct a successful incentive auction, and this would be an important way for the organization to help us achieve that goal. Like my colleagues, I also applaud KLCS, JLA, CTIA, and APTS, and any other acronyms I've left out, for supporting the proposal of a channel sharing pilot program in Los Angeles. I hope that the Commission will take up that proposal soon, and I will selflessly volunteer to do field work in Los Angeles during the winter to ensure that that proposal becomes a success. Third and finally, we must ensure that the voluntary incentive auction is truly voluntary. For this reason, I strongly oppose regulatory ratchets designed to pressure broadcasters into participating in the incentive auction. For example, now is not the time for the Commission to change its rules regarding joint sales agreements, or JSAs, and shared services agreements, or SSAs. Pro-competitive agreements can allow stations to save costs and provide the services that we should want television broadcasters to offer. In my home state, for example, a JSA between two Wichita, Kansas stations enabled the Entravision station, a Univision affiliate, to introduce the only Spanish-language local news in the entire state of Kansas. And across the border in Joplin, Missouri, a JSA between Nexstar and Mission Broadcasting not only led to expanded news programming in that market, but also nearly $3.5 million in additional capital investment. Some of that money was spent upgrading the station's Doppler radar system, which probably saved lives when a devastating tornado destroyed much of Joplin in 2011. Most importantly for these purposes, targeting JSAs and SSAs could harm the FCC's relationship with broadcasters at the very time that we need their cooperation in order to make the incentive auction a success. Finally, I would like to thank the Incentive Auction Task Force for today's presentation, as well as for all of its hard work on this critically important matter. I look forward to collaborating with my colleagues and with all of you in the time to come as we proceed to a report in order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Yes, thank you. Following past practices, I actually have two questions rather than a statement. Like my colleagues, I've stated that broadcaster participation is critical to ensure the success of the auction. I'm pleased the task force is conducting a continuing outreach and education to broadcasters. However, if I follow the presentation correctly, the targeted outreach and education to key broadcaster constituents and markets would occur after the report and order is released. Are we already doing the one-on-one outreach that Commissioner Rosenworcel discussed?
Commissioner, we completely agree that broadcaster participation is a key to the whole auction, and therefore outreach to broadcasters is really crucial. Our outreach to date over the last couple of years has been significant, and we have had conversations with individual broadcasters, but we know we need to increase that effort. And we think that the report and order, will provide a more concrete basis for us to go further out to specific broadcasters. But in specific response to your question, we want to assure you we do not intend to wait until the actual report and order to ratchet up and increase targeted individual broadcaster efforts.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Second question. Since knowing all the rules governing the auction will be extremely important to interested bidders as they prepare to participate in the auction, isn't it important to settle the open question regarding surrounding mobile spectrum holdings in a timely fashion? Obviously, I have my views on the matter.
Your fundamental point that certainty for bidders is important. We completely agree with. The Mobile Spectrum Holdings proceeding is a joint efforts of the task force and the Wireless Bureau. And at this point, we are closely considering the record in both proceedings to make a final recommendation to the Commission.
Thank you.
One of the things that they never told me about this job was that I was going to be required to have to deal with and recite lyrics to modern songs. As a child of the 60s, a lot of the things, Ajit, that you bring up, I've never heard of. I don't know that song, As a child of the 60s, however, that great American troubadour and poet, Bob Dylan, did tell us that you don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing. And the wind is blowing, and this task force has been doing a great job catching that wind and leading us to a new future. Gary, to you, thank you in particular, to everybody on the team. Thank you for all of your continuing efforts. It's only going to get tougher from here on out. Commissioner Clyburn, your selfless service in Mexico, and no, but seriously, I don't want to.
I really was working.
Yeah, no, I want to not make light. Your diplomatic mission down there to be able to continue the dialogue and deal with these crucial cross-border issues that can affect everybody throughout the country is very important. Thank you for doing that. And everybody in this room, appreciates Commissioner Rosenworcel's incredibly terse and effective comments at CES when you stood up and said, spectrum, and spot on. And that's what we're all about here. The other part about it is we also all recognize that not only is there this challenge with spectrum, but the task that the Congress has given us to build something that's never been built before, and the responsibility that this task force has is monumental. The roadmap is well thought out. Thank you. We now have a more detailed view. We are on course, at speed, to get this done right, thanks to the work of the task force. And we look forward to when you bring back your recommendations for the final determinations on so many of the things we've talked about up here today. I, too, want to join in welcoming my great friend, Howard Simons, to be the vice chairman of the task force. Gary used the term exceptional talent. That's an understatement. And we're just to have you as a part of the FCC team, Howard, means a lot to all of us, and we look forward to the zest, humor, and great set of abilities that you bring to this agency. Thank you for joining us. Gary is going to continue. Just getting the ideas after saying nice things about Howard, that Gary is going to continue as the chairman of the task force, as well as my special advisor on the auction. And thank you, Gary. Everybody has talked about the channel sharing agreement in Los Angeles. It is a big deal. Thanks to CTIA, thanks to APTS, to KLCS and KJLA. I said, a while ago in a speech that there is an incredible opportunity represented by sharing. Never has there been a point where it's been simpler, safer, or more profitable for an incumbent service provider to take advantage of a new technology, and we're in keen anticipation of what we learn in Los Angeles. So to the whole task force and everybody, all my colleagues, thank you very much. Madam Secretary, would you please announce the next item?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, last on your agenda today is a presentation on process reform at the FCC.
Thank you. Look at everybody else brought a whole army with them. You know, and here we have the army of one.
I know, I feel kind of lonely out here.
Diane, please.
I was going to say good morning, but now I'll say good afternoon, Commissioners and Mr. Chairman. And I'll observe that I wish I'd not only brought an energy bar with me, but a space heater to pick up on the theme that you've been discussing already. The report on process reform at the FCC, which is presented to you today, offers a range of recommendations for ways to improve how the Commission conducts its business. The report examines the agency's initial operations with a critical eye, looking at what the FCC does well and what it can do better, with the aim of enhancing the overall functioning of the agency and its service to the public. Last November, the Chairman asked me to coordinate a review of the Commission's processes and rules and present recommendations to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the FCC's operations. A staff working group on process reform, composed of individuals from across the Commission, was created to carry out this responsibility. Building on past Commission reform initiatives, over the past 2 months, the team has engaged in a very intense and comprehensive effort to identify and analyze recommendations on process reform. To guide this review, the process working group identified several overarching goals of the process reform initiative. First, streamlining Commission procedures and data collections to improve the speed of service and reduce the cost of regulation, while ensuring that the Commission collects the information it needs to perform its regulatory responsibilities. Second, expediting the FCC's internal review processes on both routine and complex matters and reducing existing backlogs in order to promote timely resolution of matters handled by the Commission. Third, improving interactions with consumers, service providers, state regulators, and external stakeholders to make our actions more transparent and understandable, enabling more effective communications between the FCC and those who do business with the agency. And finally, eliminating or streamlining outdated rules to lift unnecessary burdens on service providers and the Commission's limited resources. The process reform team pursued a series of inquiries to determine which specific reform proposals would further one or more of these objectives. We first reviewed the recommendations of previous reform initiatives to determine which might have continuing value. Their working group also sought and obtained and reviewed ideas from internal sources, including staff and commissioners, as well as external sources. Ideas from external sources were solicited in several ways. We invited external parties to respond to a blog post on the Commission's website, and the suggestions we received were subsequently posted on the website. The working group also started the process of meeting with staff of other agencies to identify possible ways their agency's procedures could help inform recommendations for the FCC. In addition, the working group also reviewed congressional perspectives on FCC process reform as expressed in member statements or draft legislation. This comprehensive process of assimilating and analyzing process reform proposals produced a wide range of suggestions, which the group distilled into well over 100 recommendations for this report. Taken together, these recommendations aim to help the FCC staff to work faster, smarter, more efficiently, more transparently, and more inclusively. A number of the recommendations seek to improve speed of service, accountability, and transparency in our internal processes by upgrading tracking systems and establishing more systematic timelines for internal review and deliberation. Others propose innovations to streamline licensing and internal processes and handle consumer complaints more efficiently. This report recommends that the Commission explore additional mechanisms for refining issues that come before the FCC, including greater reliance on external, multi-stakeholder bodies or third-party entities that could narrow the scope of issues brought before the FCC, especially in technical contexts. The report also examines the improvements to our internal management and IT infrastructures that are needed in order for us to have the necessary tools to implement these recommendations. Finally, the report includes a number of proposals to eliminate or streamline specific rules or processes. These recommendations represent only a beginning, not an end. We will ask for public comment on the report in the near future and look forward to integrating that feedback into implementation of the recommendations. The blog post email address will remain open to receive new recommendations from interested parties. In this way, the process reforms that are presently achievable can be implemented while ensuring that additional ideas that emerge over time can be considered in the future. In closing, I would like to personally thank the members of the Process Reform Working Group listed on the slide before you, who helped at every step of the way by analyzing comments, conducting meetings, and drafting recommendations, all the while holding down their day jobs. This project could not have been completed without their ideas, their energy, and their enthusiasm. Thank you for your attention, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, and I look forward to working with you to implement the process reforms here at the FCC.
Thank you for your efforts in this challenging task. Commissioner Clyburn.
The chairman is to be commended for launching an initiative on process reform and shepherding it along at a rapid but responsible pace. As anyone who has been involved in these types of endeavors can attest, this is no small feat. Success hinges on the embrace, participation, and inclusion of the entire enterprise, from the mailroom to the boardroom, from the guard's desk to the chairman's desk. I know the team leading this effort has been working intensively over a relatively short period of time, and Special Counsel Diane Cornell is to be commended for her tireless efforts. I appreciate the spirit and openness with which you have worked to gather information and input, especially in expanding the focus groups to include everyone in this agency. As we move along this path, I believe it is important to be guided by a few basic truths. While there always will be room for improvement, this agency can and should be proud of its record of performance and production amidst some incredibly challenging sets of conditions. We continued our work during times when human and financial resources were stretched thin and our capacity restrained. Our dedicated staff and professionals managed to draw upon a deep reservoir of hard work and old-fashioned resolve to keep our nation's communications apparatus forward-moving while adhering to our commitment to act in the public interest. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I believe process reforms, if successful, will further distinguish this agency as a model of efficiency and responsiveness at a time when our government is rightly focused on greater accountability, integrity, and responsibility. Again, Ms. Cornell, along with Ruth Milkman and the entire working group, I thank you very much for such a worthy endeavor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosewurst.
So I picked up a book recently called School Reform from the Inside Out. And no surprise, the subject of the book is education reform. But it struck me that reform from the inside out has relevance beyond education. So I'm really pleased that so many of the reform ideas discussed here today have come not just from far and wide, but also from Commission staff, from the inside out. Because the public deserves an agency that is responsible, transparent, and capable of moving at the pace of digital age demand. So when we find ways, inside or out, to improve the way we do business, we should move fast, make changes, and do better. So I commend Chairman Wheeler for initiating this process reform initiative, and I am very pleased that someone as knowledgeable and capable as Diane Cornell is leading the charge.
Mr. Pike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Needless to say, FCC process reform is not the most scintillating of topics. Last year, when I wanted to give a speech outlining my views on how to reform the Commission's processes and procedures, I went to the only group in the United States that I thought might remotely be interested, the Federal Communications Bar Association. And even then, I'm pretty sure that I saw people nodding off during my remarks. So today, I have to say that in order to spice things up, I'm tempted to go Richard Sherman on all of you. You bring in this sorry petition for reconsideration, close that docket, or I'm going to close it for you. But I'm not going to go that far. It's not necessary. Because while FCC process reform might not be exciting, it really, really matters. As I stated during my first speech as an FCC commissioner, the agency has to be as nimble as the industry that we oversee. Too often, proceedings drag on for years. The American people, frankly, deserve better. Whether the matter before us involves a Fortune 500 company, a small startup, a public interest group, or a simple petition from an individual consumer, the Commission should strive to respond promptly. Parties might not like the answer that we give them, but they deserve an answer. As someone once told me, tell me yes, tell me no, but just tell me. And this sentiment explains why I applaud Chairman Wheeler for his leadership on this issue. Many pick up the banner of process reform. Very few actually run with it. Well, you're running, so thank you. And I also want to commend Diane Cornell for her leadership on this occasionally arcane issue. Since coming on board, Diane has been in regular contact with our office and along with other offices, and I really appreciate your willingness and your team's willingness to incorporate our input into the working group's report. I was also pleased to see that the working group had reached out to solicit ideas from the FCC staff. I know the Commission's employees can feel shackled sometimes by these same process issues. FCC staffers work exceptionally hard, and they are incredibly talented. I saw that firsthand when I worked in the Office of General Counsel. But too often, our internal processes fail them, and I saw that firsthand, too, when I was a staffer. So I'm not surprised that many of the report's recommendations came from our staff. Perhaps they are inspired by the bard, Bob Dylan, who sang in Maggie's Farms, I'm sure you know, I got a head full of ideas that are driving me insane. Well, now, Diane, you've been able to help them put these ideas on paper. I have a lot more material here if you want to. Going forward, I hope that we will move expeditiously to reform the FCC's processes after receiving and reviewing public comment on the report. It would be a cruel irony indeed if the effort to speed up the Commission's processes ran aground on the shoals of bureaucratic inertia. As always, I stand ready to assist the team in whatever way I can to ensure that that doesn't happen. And in particular, I hope that we will prioritize a couple of initiatives that I think would make a big difference. First, we should make our internal processes more efficient whenever possible. Let's expand the categories of smaller transactions that qualify for streamlined treatment. Let's adopt a procedure for handling applications for review, akin to the U.S. Supreme Court's certiorari process. And let's set more internal deadlines, because nothing concentrates the mind like a deadline. Second, we should bring more transparency to the FCC. We need to make it easier for the public to measure our progress and, if necessary, hold our feet to the fire if we falter. Let's create an FCC dashboard on our website where anyone can view on a single page all of our key performance metrics. Let's keep track of how many petitions for reconsideration, applications for review, waiver requests, license renewal applications, and consumer complaints are pending at the Commission at any given time. And let's compare the current statistics in all these categories against those from a year ago, from 5 years ago, so we can see, so that anyone can see if we are headed in the right direction. If we make it easier for others to hold us accountable for our performance, I'm pretty confident that we would act with more dispatch. And one last point before concluding. We need to remember that when it comes to process reform, we do not labor alone here at 12th Street. Last year, for example, the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously passed the FCC Consolidated Reporting Act, and the House Energy and Commerce Committee passed the bipartisan FCC Process Reform Act. These two pieces of legislation would greatly assist us in becoming more efficient. Indeed, many of the reforms reported on today are no doubt inspired by those bills. I believe we should coordinate our process reform efforts with our colleagues on Capitol Hill and keep our oversight committees fully apprised of our progress. Thank you once again, Diane, for that informative presentation, and thanks to you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on an issue that really does matter.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Yes, again, I have two questions. Part of my role as a commissioner is to ensure that funding appropriated by Congress is spent wisely and effectively, and that the American taxpayer is getting the most for each dollar the agency spends. It may be too early to have specific estimates, but can you provide me a high level of confidence and assurance that, taken as a whole, the reform proposals you're considering will result in positive savings? Is anyone on your staff dedicated to calculating the potential savings to the FCC's budget, and separately on those the FCC oversees?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Well, the focus of the process reforms that I've been talking about is overall to make the FCC more efficient. A number of the recommendations concentrate on steps to process matters faster or to eliminate or streamline regulations or procedures that are outdated or no longer necessary for whatever reason. Moving matters quickly will certainly moving matters quickly for those who seek action from the Commission is certainly going to result in cost savings for entities that we regulate, as you just referenced, and saving the cost of complying with regulations or procedures that are out of date will benefit both regulatees and Commission staff by saving resources on both ends. There are some specific recommendations that address cost savings. For example, one of the specific recommendations is to transition from paper distribution to electronic distribution in contexts where we haven't done that already. Another topic that's very relevant here is that today the FCC staff relies on multiple IT databases that are unique to different bureaus in many cases and have grown up for very good reasons over time. But the proposal is to transition from those databases to a more centralized, modern IT infrastructure. And that will definitely result in significant savings over time, although I think it's important to note that there will be increased costs to actually deploy that infrastructure as an upgrade.
Second question. Over the years, a number of parties have raised the deep concerns regarding the FCC's compliance with with the Paperwork Reduction Act and the Regulatory Flexibility Act. In fact, I found the items we just approved to be somewhat lacking in their analysis with regards to these two statutes. I know and appreciate the staff is working on this. What specific steps and directions is the working group considering with regard to PRA and RFA? And can you give us a brief preview of the direction your team is considering to ensure greater analysis and compliance with these mandates by Congress?
This actually is an issue that did come up quite frequently in the staff input. The recommendations on the Paperwork Reduction Act and the Regulatory Flexibility Act do focus on a number of steps to try and ensure that the staff are as well trained as possible on both the specific requirements and also the purposes of these two statutes. The goal is to ensure that the staff has up-to-date guidance on these requirements and how they apply to the issues that they're working on throughout a proceeding, not just at the end when you're drafting the analyses. And also that they have the internal resources to enable them to ensure that the PRA and the FRA requirements are met effectively. There's also a recommendation that the staff review data collections more systematically and regularly to make sure that any data collections that need to be either eliminated or modified as a result of evolving market conditions are addressed, and with the thought that that's something that needs to be done on a systematic basis consistent with the statute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. I'd just like to observe quickly that the colloquy that we just had demonstrates how we've got the right person on the job. Your depth of I refer you to my written comments in which I am very flowery in terms of my description of your contributions to the Commission. Diane, clearly what you bring to this job is vast experience, is a determination to take on a non-trivial, let me do the negative, a very significant undertaking. And the thing that we will all benefit from the most in this agency is a demand for excellence that you have always shown. The report that you have forthcoming challenges us to do many things to follow on. It will not be a flip a switch and everything is resolved tomorrow. I think the point that Commissioner Clyburn made about the record that this commission has already established, particularly in challenging times, and the leadership exercised in challenging times, is an important base that we build upon. But what you have helped us do, and with your team, who you appropriately, called out, what you have helped us do is get a structure around which we can identify and then deal with these issues. And on behalf, as you heard from everybody up here, but on behalf of all five of us, thank you very much. And your work isn't done yet either. Now all we got to do is go on to put this stuff into action. So thank you very much, Diana. Are there any of my colleagues that would like to make some announcements? Okay, well, let's see. Okay, we'll go and say, yes, we'll start with Mignon and go work to the process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of interns I would like to introduce to you all. One is here live. If Stephanie Frank would stand up, who's a 3L at Charlotte School of Law in North Carolina. She has a background in TV, film production, and education. At her law school, she's a member of the Order of the Crown Honor Society, the Moot Court Honor Board. She's editor-in-chief of the Charlotte Intellectual Property Journal, and she's with us full-time and is a delight. Thank you so very much. Hopefully, you, by the end of the session, will still be okay. Pauline Lee is not here today, but she is an incredible 2L student at American University, Washington College of Law. She's a member of the AU's International Law Review and the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association. So say hello to her when she is here. So again, thank you, Stephanie, for being full-time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this.
Commissioner Roseworth.
Thank you. I want to announce the arrival late last year of Caleb Zev Goldman. He is the second son of my senior legal advisor and wireless guru, David Goldman. And I'm told that mother, baby, and father are happy and doing well, although the jury's still out on older brother Eli. I think the odds are good. But in any event, we now, in my small office, have 11 children. So I just want to point out we could field a pretty small but mighty football team. And while David is on paternity leave, we are privileged and thrilled to have Allison Neplock, the chief engineer of the Media Bureau, join us for wireless issues. Allison has a degree in computer and electrical engineering from Carnegie Mellon and a law degree from Georgetown University. She is a gem in the agency, and she's a female engineer, and she means business, and I am thrilled beyond words that she's been able to join us and help out during such a busy period. So thank you, Allison, and thank you also to the Media Bureau for letting me have her.
Great. Commissioner Pai.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a few announcements. I'd like to introduce our office's 4 new interns who have been with us almost a month and have done terrific work already. First is Justin Miller, our senior law clerk, senior by virtue of the fact that he started a full day ahead of his colleagues. He grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and got his bachelor's degree from Arizona State. ASU, as you may know, is regularly ranked among the top party schools in the country, but Justin informs us that it is nothing compared to the Justin Bieber lifestyle of the Pai office. Justin is in his final semester of law school at American, where he's a member of the American University Law Review. He's also an avid Phoenix Suns fan and talks about it all the time, much to the chagrin of his baseball-preferring girlfriend. Second, Nicole Zimbelman is in her second year of law school at George Mason, where she is a member of the George Mason Law Review. She's originally from the Baltimore area, but spent her high school years in Northern Virginia, where she applies her wire expertise on the mean streets of Fairfax County. Nicole went to college at the University of Colorado at Boulder, And she got a degree in journalism, but thankfully avoided an affinity for the Denver Broncos. While there, she interned at Ski Magazine, played club lacrosse, and it's...
So you're taking up sides now?
Well, we all have to decide whether we are for or against America's team, and the Broncos clearly are not for them. So, Kansas City being. But yeah, while she interned at Ski Magazine and played club lacrosse, it's not quite as enjoyable as drafting an FCC comment summary. But we we hopefully will give her a good experience in our office. Anthony Glosson grew up in Illinois, where he graduated from Northern Illinois University and worked as a web development consultant. Tony is currently a second-year student at George Washington, where he's a member of the Federal Communications Law Journal. He previously clerked at Tech Freedom, and his professional interests include telecommunications, privacy law, and peppers. Seriously, actually, I've already learned that a love of spices runs deep in his family, and he brings his own peppers into the office, including some nuclear material that would make anyone's eyes tear up. Finally, Jeff Sorkowitz is in his second year of law school at Georgetown, where he's a member of the tax lawyer. He grew up in Great Neck, New York, and received his bachelor's degree in economics and political science from the University of Wisconsin. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Big Ten's okay.
Before entering law school, he worked as a paralegal in New York City, and in his spare time, he enjoys cooking, among other things, and we have informed him that we will measure his performance in part on the gastronomic delights that he delivers or doesn't to our office. Unfortunately, he is very familiar with heartbreak as an avid fan of the New York Knicks, New York Mets, and the New York Jets. Welcome aboard to all of you.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Yes, I do have some announcements, but I won't go long in the interest of everyone getting to lunch. Yeah, a little bit warmer? Yeah. I'm also not going to make everyone stand up, so we'll go from there. As many of you know, over the last few weeks, I've made a number of decisions regarding the type of team I wanted to work alongside in my office. I'm pleased to notify everyone of the following. I was able to convince the extremely talented Courtney Reinhard to leave Commissioner Pai's office and join as my senior legal advisor, chief of staff, and voice of reason. Courtney is not a stranger to many of us, but she came to the commission already accomplished from roles at the House Budget Committee, House Energy and Commerce Committee, Senator DeMint staff, and Congressman John Shimkus, among others. I know Commissioner Pai wanted to jump in here at this point.
I just wanted to say that Courtney was a terrific member of our team, and if we were going to lose her, I'm glad we're losing her to another person at the FCC. I got a chance to work with Courtney almost a decade ago now at the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was one of my first hires here at the FCC, did tremendous work in our office, and I'm so glad that she is a member of Commissioner O'Reilly's team in the time to come.
Well, careful. She's giving all the clues to your office. So.
About the white noise machines in the ceiling. Yeah.
In addition, I've hired two respected policy experts to fill my remaining legal policy advisors. As many of you know, Erin McGrath from her excellent work as the SAGE advisor to my predecessor, Rob McDowell. She also served in the Wireless Bureau for many years, handling various duties, including transaction reviews, and was an interim legal advisor to former Commissioner Meredith Baker. Erin is joined by Amy Bender, who is also handling the heavy and challenging wireline portfolio, including universal service. As many of you know, policy expert does not sufficiently describe Amy's depth of knowledge of her issues, gained in multiple leadership positions in the Wireline Bureau and in prior detail roles at the House Energy and Commerce Committee and previously FCC Chairman Kevin Martin. I'm also blessed that my temporary confidential assistant, Susan Finsen, I'm going to kill that name, was agreed to join my team. Susan has been invaluable in getting my office started and returns to the 8th floor from her time with former Commissioner Deborah Tate and former Chairman Janikowski, and most recently was with the CBG. Last but not least, my office grew this week with the addition of new legal intern, Bill Durdach, who is a second-year law student at Catholic University's Columbus Law School and is a member of its Institute for Communications Law Studies. He, too, has experience with the FCC, having served as an intern in the Media Bureau last summer. The number one rule is if you're going to steal from the best. In this case, Courtney, Amy, Erin, and Susan are the best of the best, and I couldn't be more pleased to benefit from their good counsel. And Bill Durdach makes it a perfect addition. Please welcome my new team.
Well, excellent. Let's welcome everybody. Yes. So let me just quickly, several things that this whole agency needs to be aware of. First of all, we just ended the CFC campaign, and congratulations to everybody in the agency. Altogether, the staff contributed about $400,000, which is 16% higher than the national average, and these are challenging times. And to be able to beat the national average in these challenging times says a great deal. A lot of the credit, all of the credit for this goes to Chris Monteith and Tom Reed, who were the co-chairs of the effort, and their campaign manager, Roger Goldblatt. So thank you to all of you who participated. And in particular, thank you to Chris and Tom for their leadership. We also, somebody told me that I'm supposed to refer to the fact that we have become the Federal Cyclist Commission in 2013 because we were certified by the League of American Cyclists as a silver bike friendly business, excuse me. I don't know what we do with red bikes and blue bikes, but silver bikes are very welcome here. Both our chief technologist and former chief economist are among our cyclists. We have renewed our silver partnership with Capital Bike Share, by the way. FCC employees can borrow a bike share for 30 minutes for free. So there probably won't be a rush for them today, but when the weather gets better. And by the way, oh, yeah, exactly. By the way, we ought to go for a ride one day. Hey, folks, let's go for a ride. Last May, the Federal Cyclist Commission participated in the Federal Bike to Work Challenge, competing against hundreds of teams across the country. We were number 1 in D.C. and number 10 nationwide. Thanks to everybody who participated. That's pretty cool, huh? I also want to acknowledge my colleagues have appropriately acknowledged folks who are coming in. I unfortunately have to acknowledge somebody who's going out, Justin Cole, who has played such an incredible role in the Office of Media Relations, has been such a wonderful help to me, as I know he has been to everybody sitting up here, is got a big new job. He's going to be the boss man at the FTC media office. And I just want to know how long it's going to take him to learn to change the middle initial. But that is a great recognition of Justin's skills. We wish you Godspeed, Justin. We're truly going to miss you around here, and thank you for everything that you have done for all of us in this agency. And finally, a bit of breaking news. I was handed a note during the meeting that this morning the ranking member of the House Commerce Committee, Henry Waxman, announced that he will not be seeking re-election after 40 years in Congress. I first met Mr. Waxman when he was a state legislator. And the service that he has provided our country and his championing of American consumers, both as the ranking member as well as the chairman of the Commerce Committee and multiple subcommittees of that group, his leadership will be missed. We've all had a good working relationship with him at this agency. We look forward to continuing to have a great working relationship with the committee, and thank Congressman Waxman for all of his service and all the great things that he's done at this agency as well as throughout the government. So if there are no other things that should come before us at this time, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Should we gather for the chairman's presser, please?
This is not gathering for the chairman's presser. This is gathering for Justin's final appearance. This is your last chance, folks. I mean, you know.
Can ask me the question.
We're gonna switch roles, okay? Hello, I'm happy to introduce to you Justin Cole. You each get to take one shot at him.
And we're gonna go along the table in the usual fashion. Okay, we'll do a better job
on regulating the internet, the FCC or the FTC?
Oh!
I'm going to defer. And we're going to do it in the usual fashion. We'll just go along the table. Monty, if you want to start, if you could just introduce yourself and your news organisation.
Okay, I'm going to start with a quick opening statement. That what we tried to do today was to tie 4 items together into one common theme, which is adapting regulatory frameworks to the 21st century. I'm particularly pleased that we took meaningful 5-0 action on 2 items to update the FCC's policies to reflect new technologies. One of these, obviously, literally a lifesaver, the question of text to 911. Access to 911 just simply has to keep pace with technological change. That change has to be applicable regardless of what provider they use. Today, we also took one step closer to making this whole thing, this whole issue of text to 911, a reality this year, with the proposal that, as you know, there's the 4 carriers were going to do it this year, and the proposal is that everybody else does it by the end of the year. We also took a significant step to ensure the transition to IP communications networks and that it delivers what its potential is to improve the lives of Americans and unleash innovation, and to do it in a thoughtful manner that identifies issues through a series of trials. Our mission is to ensure that as network providers and their customers upgrade to new technologies, there will be no downgrade in reliability, availability, public safety, competition. So I'd be happy to go with anything you want to go with.
Monty, Communications Daily.
Hey, Monty.
I was wondering if, according to the timeline we got today, you guys are going to be issuing a report and order in a few months on the spectrum. There's a lot of unresolved issues there. How are you going to issue that report with so many decisions unmade right now?
We're going to make decisions. So I think what Gary said is that there will be a report and order. He identified the kinds of things that will be in the report and order, and then he said, like any other report and order, you have to wait for the commission to make some decisions before you then do some of the fine tuning on them, and that'll be handled by PNs. Celia.
It's been a few weeks since the Federal Appeals Court overturned the Open Internet rule. Can you talk a little bit about where you stand right now? Give a sense of when you will make a decision, but also what has been the reaction that you've heard from the public, from consumers, from companies? What kind of information are you trying to evaluate as you come up with your decision? And I believe that there's a public interest group that delivered something like 1 million petitions today to you. So how does that fit into your analysis specifically going forward?
You know, one of the great things that the Internet does, and one of the reasons that the Internet has to stay open, is that it enables people to organize and express themselves to their government, and it therefore enables the government to do a better job. We want to hear from those. If there are 1 million people, that's boffo. We want to hear from those a million people. And we want to, and as we have made repeatedly clear, and I will say again, we will preserve and protect the open internet. As I've also said, we interpret the court decision as an invitation, and we will accept that invitation. And I think that what you will see in a relatively short time is us stepping out to put some more flesh around those basic principles.
Howard Buskirk with ComDaily. One of the things you said that I thought was interesting, but almost surprised me a little bit in terms of the strength of it, was you said something about PSAPs. It's kind of, and I don't have the exact language in front of me, but it's time to. But doesn't the PSAP issue speak to a lot of major problems in terms of local governments and how there's not a lot of funding available? And I mean, there's some pretty big problems out there, and that's probably, from what I understand, that's the reason a lot of the PSAPs have been slow to move in the direction of being, there's just not a lot of money for them to reform all their systems.
We just released a report on the funding of PSAPs. The money that we raise on behalf of PSAPs, or the carriers raise, but on behalf of PSAPs every year. Most states do put that to good work. It was disappointing to see that several states redirect money that's on people's bills to pay for their safety to other activities that are not safety related. I think you raise a very good question, Howard. And what I was trying to do was to say to the PSAPs, excuse me, the wireless carriers have done the right thing. The FCC's done the right thing. And now it's your turn. It's a simple process here.
Hi, Matt Schwartz, Communications Daily.
Hey, Matt.
You've spoken a lot about taking a case-by-case approach to settling Internet disputes. I'm really curious how a case-by-case approach would work, given potential kind of due process concerns, giving notice to companies about how you're going to make case-by-case decisions. I think you kind of hinted at this a minute ago, but is the FCC kind of actively working on a set of principles going forward to help adjudicate these case-by-case approaches?
Have I said that we are in support of an open internet and that we will be actively protecting an open internet? And I go back to what I said to Cecilia, that we will have some specifics coming out on this shortly. And I think some of the issues that you raise, you and others, you will see addressed in that process.
Lynn Stanton, TR Daily.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi. You've made a point that these are not technology trials. They're about looking at how these principles are protected, but also that they're not going to decide the policy and legal issues. What do you see as the timeline or framework for moving on to dealing with the actual policy and legal issues in terms of the regulations covering?
I think it depends on what we find in the process, Lynn. I mean, these are going to be data-driven trials. We want to collect a lot of information so that information can help inform decisions. Whatever the data tells us.
Hi, Alina Salik with Reuters. It's been a number of weeks since you closed the docket on the media ownership review of 2010 and pulled that particular proposal off the table. Can you give us an update on the progress being made on the 2014 media ownership review?
Yeah, we've got two quad reviews to the past one you indicated and the 2014 one for going forward. We're looking at all of the topics that are interrelated there and looking at them in a holistic manner. And we will be coming out with some thoughts about that again in the near term.
Bryce Bashik with Bloomberg BNA. Afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Wondering, has the FCC received adequate information to set standardized safety levels for wireless devices? And if not, when can we expect the agency to do something?
Well, as you know, Bryce, we've got a proceeding going on that right now. We are not a safety agency. We are the agency that let me rephrase that. We are the safety agency. We are not a scientific agency. Okay, we take the scientific information that others furnish and put it into standards, into safety standards. It's a process that's ongoing. We're soliciting input far and wide. But it is absolutely clear that safety is our first responsibility, and we intend to keep it that way. Brooks?
Brooks Bolick, Politico. The court not only gave you an invitation, it gave you a choice. It said you could either go 706 or Title II. Are you leaning towards 706?
I love your questions, Brooks. I mean, could you be more subtle?
Subtlety ain't me.
We are pro open internet here. Maybe you missed that. We are looking at all of the tools in the toolbox, and we will be forthcoming with our plan and rationale, therefore, shortly.
Kate Tamarella with The Hill.
Hi, Kate.
Can you expand at all on the President's comments Tuesday night about the ConnectEd initiative and developments with it regarding the down payment with the private companies? Are there commitments for broadband deployment from those companies?
I'm sorry, the down payments for private companies, are they commitments for broadband?
Yeah, the President made comments about the down payment for ConnectEd, and he mentioned Verizon and Sprint and Apple.
Right.
Are these companies committing to actually expanding the broadband, or is this kind of a, equipment education commitment from them?
That's something that the White House has been running, and I think you need to talk to them about.
I'm wondering, you're talking about this announcement that's going to come soon about net neutrality. Is that going to be like a notice of inquiry? Is that what you're looking at to accept comments on it, or is it going to be some sort of statement about how you're going to go forward?
So I think what we will be doing is addressing a construct for how we go forward, and that will use all of the vehicles at the agency, which obviously include various proceedings and others. But it will be a construct that will then use our powers.
Kyle Daly with SNL Kagan. I feel like we've gotten progressively more specific about net neutrality, but just wondering if you had a timeline on when you might expect to be articulating some of those principles.
Soon.
All right.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. The Justice Department is signaling that it may look disfavorably upon cable mergers on competition grounds. There's no cable cap anymore from the FCC, but how will you look upon proposed mergers among major cable companies?
Well, obviously, we work closely with this Justice Department on all such issues, each of us having independent authority. We will look at the facts that are presented, and I'm not going to hypothesize on a potential kind of a situation.
Although we invite you to do so.
I know you. You have every right to ask that I hypothesize, and we'll skip the hypothetical, however. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Go get warm. This is ridiculous. That should have been our question. I mean, there's enough hot air in here. I think they turned it down.
I think we'll start with technology transitions. If and that is a yes. So if the team would come up, please.
I was hoping it was warmer under the lights.
Right. So who's first?
I'm not. When we're talking voluntary, is that voluntary on the customer side, or is it also voluntary on the company side?
Right, Brooks. It's voluntary on the company side, of course, and the only thing that the FCC has authorized today is that providers may apply for voluntary trials from the perspective of consumers. In other words, existing customers will not have their phone service taken away. That's the only thing that the FCC has authorized anybody to ask for today.
This is maybe a little bit too deep on it right now, but when you say customers won't lose their service, right now, if you go to Verizon and you subscribe to Fios, they cut you off from the TDM network. So, technically that's not voluntary for me. In the trial, if you switch to Fios, will they still cut you off?
So I think it's important to be clear that the item that the Commission adopted says nothing about when it's okay to pull out copper or make copper unavailable or anything like that. All it does is authorize voluntary experiments and seek proposals on that. As I think as the chairman said, there's nothing in this item that decides legal or policy questions, and really these are just about gathering information that can inform those legal and policy questions, which will be decided in parallel.
Can I ask a follow-up to that then? So is part of the NPRM then what would be the next step? I mean, if you've got a trial running and you've got at least new customers that have been transitioned, it doesn't seem like a great thing for the carriers as an indefinite thing. So is there anything at all teed up for what the transition to an eventual migration of existing customers would be?
We expect that providers that engage in the trials will want to use those trials to develop information, and that they may then use that information as part of what we would call a Section 214 application, by which they could seek to retire their copper networks. But let me emphasize that nothing in the experiment itself would constitute that kind of final approval. All the approvals granted during an experiment are conditional, and no provider can permanently terminate the offering of any legacy service unless it received final approval from the Commission. So that's not part of what happens in these experiments. These experiments can progress in different phases. The Commission has left open the possibility of a beta phase in which a carrier could ask to withdraw legacy services from a wire center completely, but the order makes clear that that could only happen after a full FCC vote and only after consideration of whether experiments that have been ongoing have met defined service benchmarks, whether that action is necessary to permit the Commission to fully understand the impact of the experiments, and only after consideration of the likely impact on the enduring values of which all the commissioners spoke today, of public safety, universal access, competition, and consumer protection.
I'm sorry, just to be absolutely clear. When you say that the order only authorizes these limited voluntary,
Yep.
There doesn't actually need to be. There exists a process right now, the Section 214 process,
Correct.
by which they could seek to withdraw service. So there doesn't actually need to be a further order that would somehow create a framework for a trial to go from what is being authorized to a withdrawal of service. There's an existing process for that. They would have to go through the process, but you don't need to create a process.
Let me say two things, then Julie will correct or add to this. Within an experiment, right now, all anybody can apply for is voluntary participation by existing customers. To ask for anything else would require a full commission vote and approval within an experiment. Apart from the experiments, carriers can file whenever they wish 214 applications to retire legacy networks, and the commission would process those in the normal course of business.
Thank you very much.
No, just to maybe respond in a process way too. You're right that the commission, that nothing in today's item initiates like a rulemaking that will result in new Section 214 procedures. The next step that would happen is that providers interested in getting authority for an experiment would file a proposal, put those out for public comment, and then the commission would decide on those proposals, not on additional procedures about how they should comply. So the guidelines in the order really reflect what the commission will be looking at in deciding whether to approve the proposal.
I'm sorry, Todd Shields with Bloomberg. The talk about what's voluntary and isn't confuses me. It's clear that it's voluntary for a company to initiate an experiment. That seems pretty crystal clear. If I'm a person living in experimental area A that's approved, and I'm a customer, can I tell the company, take a hike, I don't want to participate in your experiment? And if so, how is it then an all IP experiment? If I'm a TDM customer, I mean, you're essentially giving people a chance not to get on the train, are you not?
Yep, this is a really good question. Let us talk a little bit about how we hope to understand what happens. Yeah. Yes, what we've authorized today is only what you've described. As I said before, people can come and ask us for other things at other times, but all we've authorized today is that someone can apply in a circumstance where an existing customer would have to voluntarily enlist in the IP trial. So you ask the question, how can we learn from that? It can be very important. Imagine a wire center, a neighborhood or geographic location, where some customers come into the IP trial voluntarily, and so they're using IP, and others are still on the TDM network. Well, that provides us the kind of control group comparison that is fundamental to what the Commission is trying to achieve, namely measuring the actual impact of trials on users, on consumers, on small business, on wholesale customers. So we are hopeful that as we go through the process that Julie describes of getting public comment and the Commission thinking about the experiments, we'll be able to develop just these kinds of methodologies to measure the relative impact of an all-IP network.
When might the trials begin, the first experiment, if things go really great?
If an application comes in by the first of the rolling deadlines, which would be in February, then we would anticipate that the Commission would consider that proposal at its May meeting. That's the earliest that approval could come for this service trial.
Matt? I just have two straightforward questions. First of all, there's been talk about certain mandatory conditions for any trial and certain rebuttable presumptions. I'm wondering if you can go into any detail about examples of what conditions and versus rebuttable presumptions might be. And the second question was just, you said there was going to be a two-part application process, and I'm just wondering what the two parts will be.
Sure. So the conditions represent things that the Commission really considers to be absolutely essential to the core values that you heard so much about this morning. 911, it's a condition. 911 has to work. There has to be access for persons with disabilities to the experimental service. Those are things that are just basic. The rebuttable presumptions are things that we think are very important to the core values, and we think almost certainly that the experiment applicant would need to show in order to get approval for the experiment. But if there's a strong showing that it's in the public interest to achieve the same goal in a different way, we're open to seeing that. Some examples of things like that are complying with existing network change notification procedures. You know, these are a little bit more technical things. Another is, for example, maintaining existing intercarrier compensation obligations. So we think that's what needs to happen, but we don't have any specific proposals in front of us where we can really evaluate them and think about it. So if a carrier wants to, provider applicant wants to come in and make a strong showing that we can meet the public interest and satisfy the core values in a different way, we're open to that.
And the two-part application?
Are you referring to the
non-binding statements of interest?
Carol? That's, to clarify, that's not about the service experiments. That's about the rural broadband process.
So for the rural broadband experiments, that would be a two-part process where initially in March, any entity that would be interested in potentially participating in the experiment would provide a tentative, expression of interest, and then subsequently, after the commission votes on the budget for the experiment and the selective criteria, then there would be a formal application process, which would be a full application.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, since we're now on the rural experiments, and Commissioner O'Reilly brought this up, I believe, I don't quite follow this. Where is the money coming from? Because I've heard both that it's not coming away from people who are currently getting money, and we're not getting any additional money from subscribers. So you're printing it, maybe?
No. When the commission adopted the 2011 transformation order, it directed that the annual budget for the Connect America Fund would be $4.5 billion, and that's how much money is required to be collected every year. And that, to the extent that we're not spending this year $4.5 billion, that leaves a little bit of money left over. So it's money that, has been collected that will be available without changing the $4.5 billion budget.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there questions on the text to 911 item? That's a no. Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much. Okay.